Welcome everybody to Soft Bulk number 9. Y'all, I think we need to have a party for the next time. We're getting on up there. As we're getting ready to get started here and folks are still rolling in, would invite you in the chat to share a couple of things. One, where you're from, and two, what do you collect? Because we all collect stuff, right? I don't need to tell you that I collect fresh direct bags in order to keep all my stuff. What do you collect? Luke, Heidi, Roderick, what do y'all collect? You got abundance of things sitting around other than fabric?
You know, I go through different phases of collecting things. My new thing is ceramic. Ceramic mugs, I think, are brilliant because they are affordable art that are functional. So there's a lot of the kind of quilt conversation in them, in that they have a beautiful history of materiality. And there's so many different makers so that you can love some and hate some and, you know, be ambivalent to some, but it's all within this same kind of realm of objects. So I have a wall of about 100+ mugs that I've collected.
Oh. You collect sunglasses too, if I am not mistaken.
I have 350 pairs of sunglasses. Maybe I should have started there.
Model there.
Yeah, I collect jewelry, especially inherited from my grandma and stuff.
Oh, yes.
My like pandemic indulgence is maybe I collect like massage equipment.
Whoa, Somer says they collect teapots. We could be a team. You could make the tea, I'll bring the mug, and you know, we could sit around and tell stories.
Oh.
Sierra from Asheville. Luke, you want to tell folks where you are?
I'm sitting in Asheville right now. I'm sitting in Asheville. Let's talk mugs.
You know, Luke was streaming perfect for the last 20 minutes all in a row, and now you cut out just there.
Oh boy, I'm just talking about mugs.
And he's frozen with his hands raised to the skies. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here tonight. We are so excited to have Roderick Kiracofe with us, quilt collector extraordinaire and author of a book of more than one book of quilts. We're going to hear a lot from him in just a moment, but first let's go around and we'll just give you a howdy do. If this is your first time to Soft Bulk, thank you for being here. I'm Zak Foster. I am from North Carolina, currently living in Brooklyn, New York, and I make repurposed quilts quilts out of repurposed materials. I guess you could repurpose my quilts if you want to. They just haven't been around long enough. Tonight, I'm really excited because I will be sharing with you my Moon Mandala quilt. It is an entirely hands-on project I've been working on for the last few months, and it's ready for its world debut. So thank you for being here. Heidi?
All right, I am Heidi Parkes. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I do a lot of quilting and hand quilting, hand piecing. Lately though, I'm dabbling back into machine piecing. I've got a workshop coming up that I'm going to share about. That is my first virtual hand and machine piecing. We're going to get into scrap quilts. So that feels like an exciting toe back in the arena of machines. And I recently completed an artist residency called Art Servancy. It was a year-long program, and my exhibition is up right now in Port Washington, Wisconsin all month. And I'll be sharing a little bit more about that later too. Over to Luke.
Hi everyone, Luke. I make reclaimed quilts. I do a lot sort of Zak reclaimed materials into quilts. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina right now visiting. I've got a show up at the Blue Spiral Gallery. Family's here. I grew up here, so I get to come and kind of eat at all the restaurants from my nostalgic youth. And we're about to move from Kansas City to LA, so I'm basically spanning the entire country in one month's time. Roderick?
And Luke has a show at Joe Cunningham's gallery, which I just went to the opening of, which was a wonderful show. I'm Roderick Kiracofe, and I am in Petaluma today. And I'm going to be in Petaluma more of the time. Used to live in San Francisco for 43 years. And we're moving to Petaluma, where we've had a house for a while, but going to be more based here. And because the building we were living in is being sold, I lost my wonderful quilt barn, which was behind those two flats. But I just found a space. I am going to be above a quilt and fabric shop called the Quilted Angel. So I guess that makes my spot above, I'm going to now be in quilt heaven. So that's the way I'm looking at it. Thank you for inviting me today.
Yeah, thank you for saying yes.
Yeah, we are thrilled to have you here because the last couple chats that we've had, we've been talking about the business side of quilting with more Grace Ambrose of Folk Fibers. And we've been talking about it from the quilter's perspective. And I am thoroughly intrigued with what you're about to share with us tonight, which is what a quilt collector looks for in a good quilt when they're considering adding it to their collection. So thank you for being willing and being game to join us and talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's just so many hats of quilt collector, curator, author. It's exciting from all
user, owner, creator.
I've had the good fortune to wear a lot of hats in this quilt world. That it's 43 years that I've been involved with it, which is sometimes a bit of a shock, but yeah. So you guys now are going to show your, well, I thought you were going to show your.
Yeah, Zak, top two. Zak's going to share with us. He's been teasing about this moon mandala quilt. We want to know.
Yeah, we're going to make you wait.
If I go first, there won't be enough time for everyone else. I'm a talker. Sorry. So
you've been warned in advance.
We're going to put a mute on me for the moment.
I got the hook off stage, Roderick, ready to drag you off whenever we need to. Yeah, we're, me and Heidi and Luke, we're just the opening acts. We're going to make you wait for the main event. But yeah, let me get started here. Show you what I've been working on lately. This is the first 100% hand-pieced project I've done in a little while, especially of this size. I mean, I've done a lot of tiny stuff, but I'm excited to share it with you in just a moment because it's been something that I've had to be a little bit like undercover about because I have been working with a small group in a small workshop setting on how to bring this out to the big world. And so I'm happy to be able to start telling that story with y'all tonight. So many, many months ago, I was down near where Luke is now in North Carolina. And I was in Ed McKay's bookstore, if you know Ed McKay's, love him. And there are a bunch of used books. And in the art section, they had a couple of books about mandalas that somebody had dropped off. And I was like, oh, this looks cool. Picked them up, threw it in my basket, and went out the door. Didn't think anything of it. And then it occurred to me that wouldn't it be kind of an interesting practice to pair my morning pages, which I've done for nearly a decade, with a morning mandala. And morning pages, you're probably familiar, came into light with Julia Cameron's Artist Way back a few years ago, probably 20 or so years ago now. And morning pages writing, I think, makes a lot of sense for Julia Cameron because she is a poet, a journalist, a writer, etc. I like words, but I consider myself more of a visual person. So I think these mandalas have been really powerful for that. I've been thinking a lot about what Carl Jung had to say, the Swiss psychologist who brought mandalas from their largely Tibetan, but also international place and put them squarely in the middle of Western psychology. Jung was sitting at his breakfast table one day and he was drawing this little circle, and usually his circles came where he started and where he ended, they matched. And then one morning, after having a fight with a good friend, he drew his circle and the lines missed each other, the two endpoints missed each other. And that was his revelation that maybe his subconscious was trying to tell him something about what was out of balance. And so he began studying back in the 20s or 30s, how we can bring mandalas into our self-work to kind of dig around what's happening in the subconscious, because it's there. It just can't always come to the surface because we're so busy doing other things. Jung himself said that he thought the most important question that any of us could ask ourselves is, what myth am I living? And that's the question I want to bring to you tonight, because he doesn't assume in that question that maybe some people aren't living myths. He assumes that every single one of us is living a myth. And so when I show you my quilt here in just a moment that comes from this practice of daily mandala drawing, I am sharing with you what is my personal myth. And I don't think of myth as a term of something fictional, right? This is real stuff. I just refer to it as kind of like poetic reality or maybe metaphorical reality. It's just a way of thinking about what's happening in our lives, but through a different lens, through a more zoomed out lens. So when I say myth, I'm not thinking fiction. I'm thinking, if anything, the reality behind the reality. One last caveat I'll make before I show you world debut of this mandala quilt that you're so patiently waiting for, is that the story, the explanation, what I'm about to share with you is very me-centered. And that I don't want to leave you with the impression that that I think I'm the axis of the world, you know, but it's the idea that, like Joseph Campbell said, that we are all the heroes of our own journey. So when I share with you my myth, and hopefully one day you can share with me your myth too, we will all be the central figure in that story. Okay, so with that caveat and without further ado, here is the project I've been spending the last 3 months hand sewing. See now for the very first time. So this is round, obviously, true to form to the mandala. And in fact, I mean, there's many ways we can approach this, but I'll show you. This is the original mandala drawing, right? So you can see it's a fairly, I don't know, I mean, it is what it is, right? Like I just represented it. But I knew when I drew this one back on August the 11th, that this one was key for me, right? This one showed something about how I saw my place in the world that stood out head and shoulders above the other mandalas I've been drawing, the tallest poppy in that field. And what I hadn't realized when I drew, but what I did realize when I started working it into fabric, is I thought this was just like a cute little red cottage, like in the woods somewhere, you know, and Alice in Arends, if you're listening with your little triangular red cottage, we have that crazy universal moment. But when I started working in fabric, I realized this isn't like some tiny little cottage tucked away in the woods. This is a lighthouse, and it's been kind of foreshortened by the way that it's been represented. And so you can see erupting from the top of this lighthouse, this massive beam of light. The light itself is filled with what I call the triple heart. That's another symbol that's come up quite a bit in my mandalas. For me, that means that I got a lot to give. You know, I got a lot of love to give. From the light comes raining down eggs or seeds, which is another very common theme in the mandalas I've been drawing. I like to think that like a flower, you know, there's pollen floating in the wind out there, ready to germinate and start a new project. And so I love this idea of my life as kind of the keeper of a lighthouse. And there's a lot, listen, there's tons of lighthouses out there. Dolly Parton is the lighthouse in and of herself, right? There are many, many people who are taking the light and reflecting it back for us to see in a different way. And so this has been a helpful way for me to think about my work in the world. And I think understanding what my myth is, my narrative is, helps me to focus my energies, prioritize my task in a day. Does this line up with my myth? Does it line up with my purpose? Or is it extraneous, right? And I think it's so important. I'm so thankful for the many mandalas I've drawn over the last several months and the many insights. This is just one, but this is the one I think that best situates how I see my role to play in this world. We starting back in September, I gathered a test group of, we call them Moon Pilots, Moon Mandala Workshop. There are 8 of us plus me, so that's 9. And they started their own daily mandala practice. And I started with a test group because I wanted to see if this practice was just working for me or did it have a wider application. And we met once a week for 5 weeks straight to talk about the mandalas we were drawing, the insights that we had. And it was, I mean, I don't want to speak in hyperbole, so I'm not going to say mind-blowing. It felt very significant. The way people were able to open up, to share vulnerable parts about themselves, to recontextualize things about their life and see them in a new way, felt like a really special thing to be a part of. So I'm excited about this, on the 19th, so just a little over a week away. The 8 of them are going to be sharing their Moon Mandala quilts, and we're going to have like a little expo. So I'm sure that'll be popping up in your feed on Instagram. I'll be sharing it out, no doubt about it, because I'm so excited about the work that's happening. And to conclude, I wasn't even timing myself, y'all. I apologize if I'm going long. But to conclude, I will just say that I am ready to get started with another cycle of this workshop. And so I don't know exactly the dates because I've applied for an artist residency at John C. Campbell down in North Carolina. So it kind of depends on that. But if what I've been saying has some kind of resonance with you, well, one, you can just do this on your own, right? You can draw mandalas on your own. But if you want to join a small supportive group and be part of the winter cycle of Moon Mandala, there's going to be a link in the email that comes out after this that you can click on to be notified when I have some dates shored up. This has been a super significant practice for me, and it's one that I have kept up, even though the workshop technically ended a while back. So thank you for letting me share this project. Oh, I got it here, by the way. It's meant to be, oh, well, this is really the last thing, and then y'all hook me, get me out of here. The reason there's a hole in it is because it's meant to be a
for this.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So really, the way I see this is like a sacramental vestment, you know, like
Can you stop
kind
screen
of like
sharing so we can see you real big?
So I see it kind of like a sacramental vestment, like maybe like a priest or a priestess would wear, right? And so, yeah, it just keeps me in the middle of my story, is how I look at it. So I want it to be, for me, a cape or a poncho. I don't even know what this is.
Yeah, the
I want it to be wearable
protagonist
for
of
that
your
reason.
myth.
That's right. I am my own hero. What can I say? So thank you for letting me share that. That's what's been going on in my life, and I haven't been able to share too much of it. So I appreciate the opportunity.
That is awesome. Thank you, Zak. Okay, I'm going to replace the spotlight with me and start sharing my screen. I've got a special story to tell connected to our guest, Roderick. So this is me and my dad. And when I moved here to Milwaukee in 2015, I had a lot of free time because I had just quit my job as a teacher the year before. Zak knows about that, but I did not have a whole lot of money. And it worked out perfect because I was able to visit him an hour and a half away in Madison. And we spent about 2 weeks together making this couch. We made everything about it. I turned the legs on the lathe. We designed it together. We went to Anthropology and sat in chairs and went to a nice Swedish store, figured out what we liked and didn't like, and we made a couch. And then, this is his dog, Leo. Then we made a quilt rack, and the quilt rack is designed to perfectly fit my quilts, and it's mere coincidence that it fits my duplex so well also. I was also not as good at time lapses back in 2015. The lighting is a little rough on there, but the sweet memory of my dad. So this is him. You can see him with his mended work apron when he's woodworking, and he's got his belt from the 70s that he used as a little wraparound. So if you wonder why I'm into mending, it is my father. And this is some of my first art for him that he shellacked and glued to the drill press. Back in, gosh, maybe when I was 20 years old, he made this bed, maybe it was more like 22. Anyhow, I had made this skirt for myself and he made this bed frame for me. And one of the very last set of projects that we did before my dad passed away in 2018 was some dresser drawers for my bedroom. And so this is the two of us with the biggest dresser. And I think Roderick, you'll recognize this photo, and then you can see how this quilt directly influenced the front of my set of drawers.
Wow, great.
Money was tight. I only I checked out your book from the library for a very, very long time. It was filled with Post-its. Now the new editions come out and I have already ordered it from Quilt Folk. It's going to be headed my way so I can have my own copy. But with my library copy, we got to work. I love the way he used to have all his things organized. You can see him there. This is what was happening at that time in the world. Like the same day we made this, we were also marching at the Capitol. And so this quilt really inspired me a lot. I was just blown away by how versatile that pattern is, how maybe you think this is the block, and then you realize, oh no, it can be even smaller. It can just be that little block. So this is some wood that we cut out and put together. Here's a cute little video of the way the drawer opens and closes. I didn't want to disrupt the quilt on the front. And, if you know my work, I don't normally use quilt blocks, like any kind of traditional blocks. So this is truly the only time that I can think of that I have made something from a nameable, repeating quilt block. Here I've got my birds in the air. This one, of course, and I was also inspired by Maura Grace Ambrose's her flying geese pattern. But this is what I was working with previously. Some broken hand-me-down drawers from my brother. I don't think IKEA stuff is built long enough to become a hand-me-down. So now I've got a significant upgrade at home that I'm just really pleased about. And oh, I love how the light hit the wood there. It's one of those things that's very hard to photograph, the way the light reflects. But this is my post that I made back on Instagram in 2017. Probably the first time I gave a shout out to Roderick in my Instagram feed. And it's fun to be able to look back and see the messages, like from people like my friend Heather Kinnian. And here's some more little close-ups and things that I shared at the time about this project. And it is just near and dear to my heart, and I see it every day. And it's just a truly special memory of something that I got to do with my dad. He got real sick a year before he passed away, and he was like in the hospital, like, to put the drawers together, you have to do this and that. They still need, and I'm just thankful all the time that he got to finish them himself, that I did not need to follow that advice and have somebody else. And then speaking of making things for and with people that we love, my sweetheart Bo and I just celebrated our 2-year anniversary, and I made this quilt for him as an anniversary present. And it's got this vintage flower embroidery on it, which of course we used to advertise our soft bulk. And the light was so bright this morning, but at least here's an attempt at a big reveal of the quilt. I've got to take a good photo of it and then let him keep his quilt. But last night I was watching an online talk of Mark Bradford and Julie Mertu, and I thought that was the perfect excuse to take some time to hand embroider the label for the back, which it was lacking when I gave it to him on the 4th of November. And so I still need a bit of a better photo, but I just love the way that there's so many special stories in this quilt, and you can see my recent Instagram post about it. But he drew these horses. His band is called Attack Pony, and just shy of 2 years ago, he made some drawings with me of his band. And then these are the hems on his pant legs when I hemmed his pants to make them the right length. I kept them, and like his face when he was like, Heidi, I can't believe you kept these, and these pants that I've worn here and there and wherever are on a quilt. And I loved that my friend Carol on my Instagram post knew. She was like, where else would they be? So for me, making this quilt for him feels like a really special opportunity to let him understand what it is that I do in my professional soft bulk quilter realm of my life. I also have this little icon over here. You're probably already aware I've got a sale happening on my website right now. Quilts are 25% off, and it truly is a special gift to be able to give somebody a quilt. So here are those pant legs. You can see them up close. And then I've got a little bit of reminiscing to do as well about our sustainable sewing soft bulk. So here's when we had Sherry Linwood with us. And you'll notice I talked about this quilt that I made when I was thinking about my mom. And this has a tablecloth that I inherited from her. I mean, she's still alive. She lives in Florida. I'm going to visit her later this month. But she retired this tablecloth when she moved. So keep your eye on this little corner of this big tablecloth. And then I also, when we were talking with the Zero Waste Chef, I was sharing about my long skinny strips of white cotton muslin that I trim after I put the backing on my fabric, on my quilts. And what do I do with these 20-foot long skinny strips of white fabric? So a little bit of full circle, because there was a lovely post recently, a comment on one of my posts from someone saying, I saw that strip on soft bulk before, but I had no idea the quilt would turn out so pretty. I could not see the vision. So the finished vision of those strips is this quilt. And I love all of the coincidence that went into it, working with the shapes that I happened to have after keeping and collecting all these different white fabrics. Here I've got the tablecloth from my mom. I've also repurposed this yellow and white polka dot skirt many times, and this is some of the lining of that skirt. So that's another little special bit in the quilt. But I love the way it came together, and partly inspired by my good friend Zak Foster, who back in 2015 made a white quilt that had some dark colored batting behind it. That stuck in my brain forever. And I was so excited to get to try my hand at light colored fabric, dark colored batting. So here it is on exhibition with the Art Servancy at Gallery 224. And I'm teaching a scrap quilt on it. It's a new structure for me. So it's going to be a hybrid class where a lot of the demos, technical stuff, things you might want to watch 3 times in a row till you understand what I did, you're going to get access to that before December 5th. And then when we meet live in person, it'll be 3 hours, and we're going to like dig in and talk about all the exciting conceptual aesthetic details of making a scrap quilt. And then I've got some very exciting happenings coming up for my artist residency with the Art Servancy and being at Gallery 224. So on Friday, I've got another Zoom panel discussion that people can join. And I'm going for a free walk in the lake park where I've done my residency. So if you're near Milwaukee, come hang out with me, go for a walk. And that is, oh, I set the timer for myself, 10 minutes and 45 seconds. How about that for over 30 slides?
Heidi, I just want to say I am in love with them little ponies.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
It reminds me of like the cave paintings in France, you know, just like it just feels
Mhm.
so elemental, so
Yeah.
just like to the roots of things. And so sweet, so sweet.
We met in November and he made that drawing on Valentine's Day. And it was one of those moments 3 months into our relationship where I thought like, I didn't know you were an art, like a visual artist too. It was such a amazing reveal. I love the way Bo drew those. Thank you. All right, over to Luke.
Awesome. Heidi, I am so glad you showed those amazing woodwork pieces. So I really appreciate that. Looks like I'm real grainy. So hello, everybody from the outside. So it's it for doing it in the evening. It looks like I'm like in a really cool 1970s sci-fi movie. So take that, June. So I'll just go ahead and start sharing screen. That'll be much clearer, I'm sure of it. Okay. So, play. There we go. Okay, so I'm calling this the news. So I just wanted to kind of share with everybody what I'm working on, and some of the more kind of important concepts and stuff that are coming out of Studio Haynes. This little ditty I just finished, sent it to a show Roderick knows about, the show, which I unfortunately was able to attend, but it was a fun project to work on some kind of figural work that's not just a big old picture of me, which I still will do. Don't worry, everybody. But this one, I took an orange traditional quilt and then flopped some what looks to be some fabric on top of it. So you can see here's a picture from the side. So from the front, it's sort of a trompe-l'oeil kind of effect, and I had a really fun time kind of making it be a little bit less narrative, just more like narrative about material, not necessarily narrative about subject matter. And that's pretty fun. Here's a little detail of the signature on the front there, where you can see the sheer fabric that I used for that shadow to really give it the kind of pop off the quilt. So this was a really fun project. I never tried it before, so it was a fun excuse. Joe asked me to be part of this orange show, and I said, I'll cheat by using someone else's orange quilt and then just, stick something on top of it, call it mine, it'll be fine. It's how you do in the art world. But anyway, it's a fun collaboration between me and the object. And I took a picture of the back of it so I could show, and because Roderick is a big fan of the backside of quilts, and so it's important to show those so you could see, because my big soapbox is, anyone who's ever heard me talk about anything longer than 5 minutes, is that quilts are sculpture, and so the other side of a quilt is important. It doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be aesthetic, it doesn't have to be compositional, etc., but the other side is important because it's an object, not just a reference. Soapbox done. Moving on. So jumping to a fully different project, and this is what I'll talk about today, are these affirmation quilts. It is a collaboration between me and this wonderful woman who I happen to be married to, who does these brilliant affirmation projects all over the world. She started with billboards and has moved to postcards and has done banners pulled behind airplanes and has done wheat pasting. Just think of advertising. She's dabbled in it, and the idea being free affirmations without any branding on it whatsoever. So there's nothing on here that says my name, her name, our project name, nothing. So the only thing it does say is if you find it, it's yours. It's a gift. We put it up, we leave it there, and it's for whoever finds it and decides it's theirs to take, which has been a really, really interesting project from me, from an ego standpoint. This is my job, I sell these, people give me money. So to kind of put those in the world for free as a gift to, it's as much a gift for me to give as it is a kind of hopefully a gift for whoever receives them. We've only seen one ever taken. We've done 7 of them, and that was pretty. I have no idea who gets them. I don't know the story afterwards, and that's the kind of beautiful release of this project. This one we put up in Winston-Salem 2 days ago.
Is it still there?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I guess I don't know. It's sort of part of the process. It's just sort of sticking it up and then leaving, and who knows. Here's one we put up in Joshua Tree outside of Los Angeles in California. there's the label saying that it's yours for the taking, and the label's right on the front. So it's all about kind of this, front facing gift and love and kindness as part of this process. There it is in its environment. And I know this one's gone. Somebody was out walking in the rocks and couldn't find it, so somebody has it, which is, I don't know if it's a hiker or a camper or a coyotes or whatever it is, but we're happy that it has found a home. Another one we stuck up on Land's End in San Francisco. You can see the big red bridge in the background there.
And that one, you did see the people come by and take it.
Exactly. This one, we saw the people come by and take it like less than 2 minutes after we put it up. Which was just so sweet. And they were very kind about it and sort of made sure it didn't touch the ground. And they were actually much nicer to do it than me, just tying a rope around and sticking it in a tree. This one we put up in Los Angeles. Let's see, I've got a oh my gosh, I thought I had a picture from zoomed back, but anyway, all of these really cool environments that are these great conversations. So it kind of gets to be this like guerrilla art, graffiti, pop art, kind of, very contemporary, because we're like sticking it on the wall, we're sticking it on the trees, we're like sticking it to the man, putting it up and leaving, we're not getting a permit for this thing. It's, whoever wants it. But then it's also the like, and the thing I love about quilts is, I'm not spray painting a wall. I'm putting a gift object on the wall. And look, maybe one of them's going to get thrown away. Maybe it's going to get run over by a car. I can't promise they're all going to go into, the collection of the MoMA, but, and that's not necessarily the point. The point is about like the intentionality of the gift. From my end, it's the gift of the object, and from Nicole's end, it's the gift of the language and the concept and the kind of grounding messages that are the work that she works with. So she's a writer and I'm a quilter, and kind of combined, we've made these affirmation quilts, with this little kind of take it and love it messaging on it. Here's one we put up in Las Vegas. There's the back of it for you, Roderick.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Looking out over the In-N-Out Burger just off the Vegas Strip. And one thing I think is really wonderful about these is seeing them in real life. I mean, again, quilts are sculpture objects. How do you see a sculptor? How do you see a sculpture in any way other than movement, right? I mean, even if it's a static object, Michelangelo's David, you want to walk around it to understand it. So kind of creating these videos of the object in the space, I think really helps illustrate kind of how beautiful and present, and I don't know, it talks about the things that I think are really beautiful about quilts, the sculptureness of it, but also the kind of advertising billboard illusion, sort of presenting the information about the story on them. And so taking a couple of videos of these, and this is the last image, I think, but you can kind of see, through context what they do in their environment. I think that's both really interesting and important and impactful to the whole series. This one was in Green River, Utah, and it was up for, I think, 2 days before someone told us they went looking for it and it was gone.
Was that the first one, Luke?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
This was.
I was remembering it that way.
Yeah. And again, the impact of this show, this series, is about sort of, my my residency in the world, right? I mean, the world residency of like, what are these environments mean? How can I give back to them? What do they do? How can I have a conversation with the world? And I'm embroiled in this battle, and I'll admit to you guys, all my friends, I'm embroiled in this battle with social media, which is all of us talking at the same time, but also not feeling heard at the same time, but then also feeling infinitely heard in a way that you could never feel heard before. So there's this like battle with me and the time management, first of all, but also the sort of understanding of how it all means in this. So a project like this is kind of the anti-social media, but it's specifically only shown through social media because the object is gone, and so there's this really cool kind of thorough line conversation there for me with this project. And I'll end with oh, the picture's off center, but that's Honeydew in a bathtub. In Green River, Utah, we always stay at the Super 8 Motel, and we get the honeymoon suite, which has a very funny heart-shaped bathtub right in the middle of the room. And as Honeydew is traveling with us, she thought it'd be a really cool place to sit. So there, those are some of the stuff that I'm working on, y'all.
Oh, that's sweet.
And I will go inside once Roderick starts talking, so I'm not just a weird gray blob in the wilderness.
Luke, Linda has asked real quick, what helps you decide where you will be leaving them?
So kind of in the world is my residency. It's places that we're going to go anyway. So I'm, just left one in Asheville this morning. There was one in Winston because we went there for one of my best friend's birthdays. The one in Green Rivers because we always stay at that Super 8 and with the weird heart-shaped hotel. One in LA. So each of these environments are important to me. So it's like, it's kind of the residue of my human experience. That's probably the wrong word because it sounds icky. The trail of my passing through the world is kind of demarcated by these gifts to the community.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Roderick, what I want to know everything.
All right, let me pull up your slideshow.
Well, before you do that,
sure.
Thank you, the three of you, for showing those beautiful works of yours. Heidi, I'm really touched by, it's the first I've seen anyone make something like a piece of furniture based on one of the quilts, which is really lovely. And the fact that you had that time with your father. And I love the quilt that you made for your boyfriend.
Thank you.
Zak, I wanted to ask, is the mandala quilt, and the fact that you put it on, that was quite a surprise. It was unexpected. Is there textiles in Mexico where you spent, or Central America, that is somewhat like the poncho style?
Not that I was drawing on intentionally. Yeah.
I was curious, but it's a beautiful piece, and Luke, your pieces are wonderful, and I've been loving watching the affirmation project go. Okay, so we'll start here with this book. This is the second edition. This is the copy of it, front and back. Have to show the back. Love this back. It weighs so much. I am like so impressed with how much it weighs. I thought it weighed about 5 pounds, and I don't think the first edition weighed that much, but it has it has bulk to it, which I like. Anyone that picks it up is going to feel, oh, wow. So I wanted to talk a little bit initially about kind of the whole unconventional and unexpected, the title. There have been some comments that I've seen online, both of them from people I know. One was Joe Cunningham, and the other was Julie Tolber.
No.
And there's a lot of meaning for me behind the title, kind of both personal and otherwise. There's been some, I think, thought that, oh, I was implying that these kinds of imperfect, improvisational, funky, quirky type quilts just started from the 1950s. And that's not the case. And that's not ever what I was advocating about them. One of the reasons I had Janniken Smucker, who is just a wonderful quilt historian, write one of the essays in the book about kind of what came before. And I mean, I have always been drawn to the quirky, the funky, the unusual. And this project came about of starting to collect, because when Michael, Kyle, and I will show the card, our business
All
card
right.
from 1979. We came to San Francisco in 1978 to sell quilts, and we had found this quilt in Centerville, Indiana, at Jacqueline and Douglas Eichhorn's gallery. They had a wonderful stone, I think it was like a carriage or a carriage barn, this beautiful stone building. Centerville, Indiana is a little antique center, a lot of antique shops, but they had a gallery inside that looked like you could have been in a big city gallery. They had found this quilt, Southern Indiana, was hanging on the wall of the gallery. And at the time of our collecting or dealing, we were not collecting. We made that very clear to all the people we were showing quilts to, that we were not kind of skimming off the top of what we thought were the best quilts we're putting away for our collection. We made the decision that we were not going to collect. So everything was available to people that came to look. And, you know, kind of the first impulse was, oh, we should put some perfect quilt on our card. But we decided to go with this one, which could very easily have been in Unconventional and Unexpected. We originally dated it, I think, a little too early. We thought 1890 to 1910. I think it's more was likely with the first part of the 20th century, maybe even up till the 30s. But it's been interesting for me, having been involved in this world for 43 years now, to take the time, have the opportunities to kind of look back on what he and I started doing, and then what I started doing on my own. Because at the time, I don't know if others feel this way, it's just you're kind of making things, finding things, selling things, printing up business cards. We then decided to start a book called the Quilt Digest. We decided to bring the antique world of quilts and the contemporary world of quilts together into one publication. We had come to California, Northern California. We were in a hotbed of quilt making at the time. Just, you know, some of the very best people making quilts at the time, and some still are. I mean, they were the real pioneers. And so we decided to create this publication. It was an annual publication, and it hadn't been done before. There were either books on antique quilts, all of those, like all of them were coming out of New York. E.P. Dutton was publishing them. They were all East Coast collectors and dealers. And then there was Quilter's Newsletter magazine, which was the biggie at the time, and a number of other contemporary related and quilt making publications. But we decided to put these two together and decided to do a gallery space, which I called Showcase. I only learned kind of later from artist friends, oh, you were curating that. I'm just selecting quilts to put together on these pages, quilts that I like. But it was a curation that I see now, and of antique and contemporary. Sometimes the pages were two antique quilts or two contemporary, but often it was an antique quilt and a contemporary quilt that, to my eye, they spoke to each other. There might be similar patterns or design in them that just, I love that kind of combinations of seeing those sorts of things. Or sometimes it may have just been, the colors work together. So it really was a fun thing to do. We just did these for 5 years, and then it was kind of on to the next. It's been fun for me to go back and sit down with them and look at them, and see the articles that were written that were really well researched and well written. It was a beautifully designed book. I worked with the designers because I find design fun. And just some of the quilts that were put in it. And we kind of turned the bias towards California, feeling like East Coast, New York has had enough attention. We're going to be biased on the West Coast. And then it was fun to find contemporary quilt makers. And I always decided to have a very traditionally made quilt in it. There was always a quilt from Indiana because I'm from Indiana. But it was a great project to do. Then you just had Homage to Amanda. If people have a chance to get a hold of copies of these, they're available, I think, online. And it's always meaningful to me to hear people tell me, oh, the Quilt Digest got me interested in quilts. And that's how I started my, making quilts or just being interested in quilts. We were working with collectors, Edwin Binney III and his daughter, Gail Binney, at the time, Winslow. She was a quilt maker. She had a quilt store in San Diego. Ed Binney lived on Cape Cod. He came from the Binney and Smith family, Crayola crayons, a very, very interesting man and collector of a lot of things, Turkish miniature paintings and Indian art. And some of those collections are in the LA County Museum and San Diego Museum of Art. And I think maybe the Met has some of his work, but he was really a highly regarded collector in that field. But he wanted to do this project with his daughter. And so we sold many quilts to them. They already had some quilts, but then he was on the board of the San Diego Museum of Art, did a big show of that collection. I produced, designed, or with designers, did the book, Homage to Amanda. And then that show traveled for 3 years under the auspices of SITES, Smithsonian Institute of Traveling Exhibition Services.
Was his daughter's name Amanda, or who's Amanda?
No, it was his great-great-grandmother, I believe, was Amanda. Yeah.
Okay.
That's where the Homage to Amanda came. And they have a piece in the book is a piece that was I'm not sure if it was made by her or in the family, but many of those quilts now are in the New England Quilt Museum, their collection. Gail was from New England, Cape Cod area, and so a lot of that collection went to the New England Quilt Museum, and other pieces were sold at auction. What's next? Thanks to Heidi, who prepared oh yes, the American quilt. This is another book that I'm very proud of. I'm going to just, tell some personal human stories about it.
Well, let me jump in and just say the subtitle, A History of Cloth and Comfort, is a brilliant subtitle for a soft bulk conversation, but also I think just saying the words cloth and comfort contextualize quilts in a way that I think is so beautiful that we almost forget. We're like, oh, they're like paintings. They're for the, you don't think of them as what they're made out of and what they can be engaged with. So, big kudos for that little subtitle. Go on.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Luke. I'm quite proud of myself for coming, but it was, everything came from me personally and my experience. And of course, like many, I'm sure many of you out there makers have self-doubt. I'm not good enough. I don't know what I'm doing. All of that, blah, blah, blah. But the cloth and the comfort of quilts, of what they provided, was primarily the focus of the American quilt. And I've always, from the very beginning, was drawn to quilts because my grandmother, I watched her sew. I learned later that she had made a quilt with her mother, which is in the American quilt. But I never saw her making quilts, but I watched her sewing, and she taught me kind of rudimentary red and white stitching work. It wasn't even crewel work. I don't even know what, it was tracing a pattern on a piece of cloth. But so just that connection to a grandmother and quilts. Never grew up with quilts. It wasn't until quilts came into my life later. I grew up in the Midwest. The first quilt I ever saw in person was in Los Angeles, kind of go figure. And then I saw a quilt on a wall of a professor at college. She had found a silk log cabin quilt top at a sidewalk sale, hung on the wall as a piece of art. And I was dumbstruck by that. Oh my gosh, they can be seen as works of art. So,
can I interject a question?
Please.
I know you're waxing poetic, and I want it all. I do. I want it all. But like my interest is as a person kind of coming sideways into quilting, right? I use quilts. I believe in using quilts. I don't think the word blanket is a 4-letter word. Well, it's not, but I don't think it's a cuss word. And so for you, like, do you use a quilt? What's your take on? Obviously, collecting older quilts, you can't take one of these, throw it in the washing machine to go on a picnic and expect it to last another 100 years. But I want to just ask, like, do you have a quilt on your bed, and what do you think about quilts as functional items?
Yes. The answer to that question is yes. But it was only more recently. The first person that asked me that question was Emily Bodie, who's a clothing designer in New York. Jack and I went to visit her and see her set up and see what she was up to and making. And she asked us, do you have quilts on your bed? And I went, no, kind of never have. And the reason that was, early on, yes, very early on in my young adult life, but I really I didn't want to be, just be totally surrounded by quilts. They were important to me. They were a business initially. But I also had other interests. By not collecting quilts early on, I was starting to buy photography, which I was very interested in, fine art photography. And so it allowed that part of my creativity and all to be a collector of photography and other art. But just her planting that seed made us come home and think, gee, maybe we should be sleeping under quilts. So there are now quilts on our bed. I can't say whether or not that changed my life significantly, but I do like sleeping under them. So
I think I revealed kind of recently that I'm a duvet comforter person in bed.
yes,
But when
yeah,
it gets cold out, then I add a quilt on top. But I often think of the quilt as a living room item. Like the quilt I made for Bo is for watching TV on the couch when you need a quilt to be. That's so neat that she made you think about it differently.
yeah. And I know that I got off track, which I'm known to do.
My fault. My fault.
No.
No, I'm
I
loving that
appreciate
this one is called Cloth and Comfort. So I thought it was just fun to like preview.
Yes.
I'm
so
also noticing this one is 1750 till 1950. So that further helps explain why Unconventional begins in 1950, right?
yes,
That's part
yes.
of that arc of your curiosity.
It is a full circle. And when the American Quilt started and I ended it at 1950, the idea was, well, I'm going to do a book from 1950 to 2000 of contemporary quilts. And that was in the plan, and publisher was ready to do it. The project just was not coming together for me. It wasn't falling into place like the American Quilt did. And Cloth and Comfort was also planned. Cloth and Comfort really focuses on the makers and the comfort of quilts and sewing. And as I was doing the research for the American Quilt, it would come across, in some cases, original diaries and letters of women talking about making quilts or sewing for the family and the comfort that it would bring them, or leaving the East to go West and knowing they're never going to see family again, but with them they have fabric from their mother or their sister, and just all of those kinds of personal, sentimental to me, things that, again, wanted to put that in a sweet little gift book, use details from quilts and just have fun with kind of the design of it. I was just in Boston for the Fabric of a Nation exhibition, and anyone that's in the Boston area or is thinking of going to Boston, I really highly recommend it. In seeing its show, it's a great exhibition of quilts from MFA Boston's superb collection. Laura Petrovich Cheney, who makes quilts with wood, recycled found wood, met me at the museum, she and her husband, and we walked through the show together. She brought a copy of Cloth and Comfort, and she said, "This is the book that got me started into quilts." And I just said, very few people mention that book. I still think it's a very sweet project, and actually some things that we talked about planted some seeds, and who knows, maybe there would be something come about. So the next book in the cycle was not coming together. I decided I'm going to just put this aside and go get a real job, make some money. Oh, that. The creative side versus the financial side. And then I really did examined what I was doing and all, and decided maybe I've said everything I'm here to say about quilts. I didn't want to just carry on because, somebody said something about, you're very famous in a very obscure world. And so, I'm well known and all of this and people think I'm an expert, et cetera. But you got to make a living. So again, the right circumstances came along and I put it behind me and I thought, okay, if what I've done with quilts are these projects, then I'm content with that. They were very fine projects.
Roderick, can I just to get some perspective, like
Yes.
when did you write Cloth and Comfort? Like what is this time gap that you're?
It came out the year after the American Quilt, and the American Quilt came out in hardcover in 1993.
Okay.
And then
when did
in 1994, Cloth and Comfort. And I mean, it was kind of, that was being developed alongside as I had finished the work. It was at the publisher, it was being designed. And so kind of Cloth and Comfort went into production. And then, so that was released the following year. And then I took a break. And as I said, I really thought that I was done. People say, why don't you go back into quilts again? And I'm finished with it. But I still had contacts with people who were friends. In 2004, is that? Yes, 2004. Oh, wait, I can look at the book right here. Clarkson Potter decided they were going to release the book in a soft cover.
Release Cloth and Comfort as a soft cover?
No, the American Quilt.
Oh, okay.
Why can't I find when they re-released? It was 10 years later. It was 10 years later.
Right.
And that book, really had legs to it. And I was hearing from lots of people, the American Quilt got me into quilt making and quilt history and all of that. So that was updated the resources of where to buy quilts and all. And I kind of discovering at that time, oh, there's some new dealers in this world. I thought all the quilts had been found and sold, but there were new people. There was a younger generation of people working in the field, buying and selling quilts. And then at the same time, I was aware of eBay. So that the fact that the American Quilt was coming out again just kind of got me pulled back into that world a little bit. And then there were some people saying, where did you go? Why don't you come back? And it really, I've said this many, many times, and it sounds somewhat cliche, but it's the truth. I woke up one morning and thought, what were the quilts made in the 1950s and after? In the quilt history world, there was just such a definitive line that in the 40s, quilt making stopped. In World War II, availability of blankets, but blankets were always available in a sense, but quilt making just stopped, not to start up again until some of the early pioneers in the 60s and early 70s were starting to make quilts, Back to the Land and Bicentennial and all these yes, the Bicentennial played a part in that, but it was more about, the contemporary quilt makers, Jean Ray Laurie being an early pioneer, Yvonne Porcella, Joan Schultz, Linda McDonald, Jean Hughes, a lot of the early people, most of them artists trained who came to cloth to make quilts. But I just started thinking about what were the quilts like? Were there quilts out there? Were there quilts were they made then? Maybe I would form a collection, but I was just gonna try my hand at it. a big part of it was I was going to trust my eye. I've done all of these books and I still would carry this doubt about, oh, my eye isn't that good. I don't really know what's a good quilt. Everyone says I do.
Mhm.
So it was an experiment. It was just a curiosity that I wanted to kind of proceed with. And I put together criteria of what I was going to look for. And it was primarily pieced quilts, quilts primarily with printed fabric, because I like printed fabrics. And knowing that, I was also aware of Gee's Bend had happened and was in New York and getting lots and lots of attention, but just earlier in that, going through the whole Amish phase, and Amish quilts are great. I love them. No printed fabric. There's a lot of stories behind why there are no printed fabric, or why we didn't see printed fabric Amish quilts early on, because it was what the dealers were bringing out of Lancaster County and other counties. These are what they think will sell, and they did. I found it curious too. I mean, the quilts from Gee's Bend, which are incredible, they're wonderful. But my belief is they were not the only makers making these kinds of quilts. The quilts that we started seeing in all the exhibitions and the books from Gee's Bend, solid color fabrics, very little or no printed fabric. I like printed fabrics, and kind of like the more the better in a quilt. I grew up being a real perfectionist, which is a blessing and a curse. I put a lot of, quote, perfect quilts in the American quilt, but I also scattered through that quilts that weren't perfect, that were quirky. I have comforters. There's a great comforter in the American quilt that I borrowed from America Hurrah. Comforters were considered the lowest of the low in the dealer collector world. No one wants to buy a comforter. They're just utilitarian. And in some cases, they're heavy and ugly or whatever. And definitely around the Amish quilts, and dealers kind of put that barrier also about the 1940s. Yannick and Smucker did this great research and discovered a lot of these great Amish quilts that were identified as pre-1940 that are in museums, that are in collections, were actually made in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Does that make them any less interesting or incredible or beautiful? Not in my opinion, they don't. So, imperfect quilts, possibly made using a traditional pattern, but then going on down a variation on it. Let's see. Yeah, so just something that caught my eye, that just made me think, wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty interesting. I'm going to trust this.
I love those moments when something expands my definition of what something can be. I think that's such an amazing spot to be in visually.
So I know, so this I started buying in 2004. A number of years, 2 or 3 years into it, Jack, my husband, said something about the quilts that we had rolled up on a shelf in the house in Petaluma. And he says, why don't we get those out and use them? And I said, no, we're not going to use them. I'll do something with them. But I got them out and looked at them. And we do have pictures of, these were quilts that I bought in 1998. Yeah. I was invited to, not that one, the next one. Yeah.
And this one, right?
Yeah.
Those were the first?
Yeah, I was invited to give a talk at the Nelson Atkins Museum. There was I think a Smith College gathering, and they brought in people to give talks, and there was a whole weekend thing. One of their conservators collected African-American objects, furniture, paintings, drawings, quilts. I said, I'd love to see what you have. And so he traveled in that area finding these things. We looked at a number of quilts, and I said, do you ever sell any of them? And he said, yes, I do. And so I bought 3 from him in 1998. The first was this double wedding ring. And the first one, double wedding rings are a ubiquitous quilt pattern that, there were millions made from probably the 1930s on, generally pastel, white backgrounds, pastel fabrics, printed fabrics, flower sacking, feed sack kinds of prints. They're pretty, but I wouldn't want to own one until I saw this one. And this is on, it's a flannel background, dark. To me, it's just, it's magnificent. It goes beyond it. It way exceeds what most people think of a double wedding ring quilt.
Roderick, is it pieced in still, or is it appliqued?
No, it's
I think I
pieced.
can see that it's pieced. Okay.
It's pieced, yes.
Yeah.
And then the next one,
Mhm.
both of them are tied. They're comforters.
Yeah.
I just thought, this is really wild and wonky and unusual, but yet it's based on a central medallion.
Can you give us a sense of the scale of this one? Because to me, it looked like, I'd believe you if you told me it was 10 inches, but I bet it also could be quite
it's probably
large.
70 by 60 or, in that range. In both of them are.
Yeah. And so let me just share with the audience as well that sharing these 2 quilts is in response to a question that we got yesterday or the day before from Amanda Nadig. She was curious about the first quilts that you collected. And I do think now could be a fun moment to start encouraging folks to put some questions in the chat for Roderick to stir up some conversation. Yeah, that's amazing. This one's so large.
What I loved about it, though, that it was based on a very classic textile.
Mm-hmm.
But it was made in the 30s or the 40s, maybe the 50s. I've always believed from the very beginning of dealing with quilts, have put quilts in a 25-year, at least a 25-year time period.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not one that was, that was made in 1930. That was made in 1945, or that was made in 1880. Women were working on these for a long time. And I heard, today, makers today sometimes can take a year or 2 to work and finish a quilt. But so I love just how it was kind of related to something very classical, but it was using bark cloth, which that's a material that's often found on lanai furniture in Florida or Hawaii. I think it's fun and funky, but then it appealed to me. But that came home, got folded up, put away. I also grew up in a Midwest family where anything that was special got put in the cedar chest or in a box on the top shelf of the closet for something special, to use at a special time. And there never was a special time, really. They would get found when a relative died and you're cleaning things out. Oh, where did this come from? So it was fascinating to me once I'd started this collection 2004 on, I realized that collection had started in 1998. I just didn't know it. So kind of this unexpected to me. And let's go to, both of those quilts are at the International Quilt Museum now. They're in museum collections. The next quilt
Let
is...
me interject
yeah.
though, because I know we have so many wonderful quilts to look at, but I don't want us to get too like, I don't know, stuck in one mode. I want us to keep things spicy.
Good.
So what you're sharing about that kind of classic story of you make something special, put it in a box, nobody knows it's there, and then the maker has passed on. That is reminding me a little bit of the conversation that you had last week with the Quilt Alliance. And you were talking about how sometimes the maker is alive. Sometimes people assume they're gone, but they can actually be tracked down. And Leslie Wade has just asked about if the former owners or family members have figured out that you own or have published a quilt from their family. But I guess I'm interested in a lot of those sort of human connections of living quilters versus quilters who've passed on, and some of your tenacity in figuring out, how can we prove who they were? Let's not just assume that the quilt was made by an anonymous person who's no longer alive.
I wondered too, when the book did get published and was out there in the world, would somebody in a family come up and say, that was my grandmother made that, or my mother made that? I really would welcome that. It hasn't happened yet. And again, coming into this project as a historian, I wanted to gather as much information about who the possible maker was, and was shocked when I started asking, who made the quilt? No. Why would you want to know that, would be the question. I go, well, it's kind of nice to know who a person that made this. It just, it adds to the wonderfulness about it if we can say who made it, or if we then can find out anymore.
And then that makes me curious with Luke too. Is that like also part of what interests you in not putting your name on your affirmation quilts? Or is that, coincidental that you don't want to be marketing or advertising with it? But it's I think, like, listening to Roderick right now is making me think about what you're doing in a sort of different way of like, actually, if you poke around a little bit, there is an abundance of information about you, the living maker of that quilt.
Sure. And I think there's a lot of really big conversations about historical gender identity as it relates to sort of women's work who made it and then sold it. And also just historical craft work, whether it's gender biased or not, it was somebody hired the maker to do a thing, and it wasn't a maker as an artist, it was a maker as a maker. So they're unsigned because despite their artistic qualities, the sort of subtext is that they were just a goods for sale kind of a thing. Quaker Oats doesn't sign their box of cereal, so why should I sign my,
the quilt from Kohl's isn't signed.
Yeah, and so I think that's, and certainly a misnomer, right? I don't agree. If you make a thing that's stick your name on the front of it, big Sharpie letters. I'm a big fan of that. So I'm not suggesting that's what people ought to do, but just to kind of talk about that sort of history of that lack of signage. But then jumping forward towards the world of art, right? We sell art by who makes it. Right. What if it's interesting? That's not as, you the name is more important than what it is in a lot of ways. More complications there. So for me, not putting my name on an object makes it a gift, and it brings it back to that world where I am saying it's not about me, it's about you. Like, here is this quilt, here's this gift, here's this object, here is this craft, here is this function that I am providing, as opposed to having it sort of carry the weight of reflection, right? Whoever gets it doesn't have to look it up. They don't have to say thank you. They don't have to, maybe it's valuable, maybe they sell it, maybe it's valueless and they throw it away. But without that name on it, there's no contextualization. And so I think it's sort of exactly the opposite of what Roderick's talking about, in the sense of like not knowing who made it is sort of a travesty in some senses. Historical quilts, it's like, tell me who made it, that's cool.
I think it's great in this day and age, though, that Luke, you can document those quilts, and there is that record of, yes, they're unsigned, but we know they were made by Luke Haynes.
Mhm.
As you all were showing your work, I also was being fascinated by how wonderful it would have been to have been able to talk to. Now, some of the quilts do have names, and I have been able to then find them in census records. Others are anonymous. And I just felt like, well, anonymous is still alive and well in this day and age. And I'm a believer that you look at the object purely what it looks like and the response that you get versus, oh, it's by so-and-so. Very few museums follow that. A good curator will have that attitude, but I think most museums want the name of the artist, and it's great, but all museums are filled by works by anonymous. And again, I became comfortable with the fact that I'm not going to know, but always, as with any quilt, what was that maker thinking when she made it? What was her life like? And it was so fascinating to hear all of you talk about what your life is like, where that material came from, what you were studying. It was exciting and really thrilling for me to hear that. It's great now it's recorded too. And I'm sure you all are doing as much documentation of where did this strip or these strips come from, and why did
That's what makes it the full-time job that it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Roderick, have you ever gotten hooked on one that you've actually done the work to kind of follow, like months, 6 months, 2 years to like find your favorite quilt object and like, unpicking the corner to see if it's cotton from an era that, like, have you kind of, okay, yours isn't necessarily an interest in who made it, it's about the object, but have you ever gotten kind of
my interest very much so is in who made it. It always has been. And when I did buy quilts that came with some information, but I've never been one to say, just jump to the conclusion, oh, it was made by this woman. And the fact that African-American quilts a lot of quilts came with African-American made because I think they felt like they could get a higher price because people wanted to collect African-American quilts. It didn't matter to me whether it was made by an African-American woman or a white woman. But if it did come with a name, I wanted to try to find who she was and where she lived and existed. And some I've been able to do that. So I can definitively say it was made by so-and-so. And according to census records, she is African-American, or according to the census records, even though the information that came with the quilt was an African-American. No, my belief is that it was made by this woman who is white in the census records. There still could be research done to find out the opposite, but I love doing that kind of research, going down a rabbit hole of ancestry.com or familysearch.com and trying to put together and piece these people together and find out about them. And it's been exciting when that happens and can work, and other times we're never going to know. But
Well, I'm bursting to cue over to Zak because you just had a very fascinating experience of being in the middle of figuring out who started making a quilt. Do you want to share?
Well, yeah. I mean, that was going to be my punchline is Roderick. I got a
I know.
foolproof method for you.
You
Just
have
get
what?
a hip hop star. Just get a hip hop star to wear your quilt on some big red carpet.
Right.
The maker will come to you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's what happened with that the quilt that I collaborated with Eli Russell Inez with the Met Gala back in
Right.
September. He tried for months to figure out where that quilt he had found in a thrift store in LA had come from,
Yeah.
to no avail. But because it gets such wide publicity in a way that quilts generally don't in pop culture. I mean, that quilt reached audiences that never even think about quilts on a day-to-day basis. Well, one of those sets of eyes scrolling through on Instagram was a young mother whose kid was asleep in the bed next to her. She was trying to study while she had a few quiet moments, but of course got distracted, as we all so easily do with Instagram, and saw what turned out to be her great grandma's quilt.
Yeah.
Just flashed before her eyes. She couldn't believe it. Amazing.
That's great. I was for a while tracking down and in communication with somebody on ancestry.com who I thought was, a descendant of a maker, and then it became a dead end again. It wasn't. But how did the three of you feel about for the Met Gala and all of the emphasis on patchwork or the word quilt? What reactions did you all have?
Bring it on. Bring it on. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. I certainly want to be the one they call to make all the patchwork outfits to go down the red. Look, I want to be the first on the, speed dial. So I have emotions about that from a particular ego standpoint, I'll admit. But man, the more people doing it, the more people want it. You know what I mean? As a metaphor, like before people knew what sushi was, nobody would go to the sushi restaurant in every town. Now each one is more successful because people are like, I'll eat raw fish, that's fine,
Right.
but so like things that are out of unconventional or unexpected, as I've heard a brilliant man say, it's helpful to kind of put them in the zeitgeist. And so if quilts become important through garments, well, they'll become important as quilts again. And there's just all of this resurgence in different ways of quilts as art objects, thanks Bisa Butler, quilts as garments, thanks influencers on Instagram. There's a lot going on, and I'm all for it because the more eyes on it, there's 22 million quilters in the world, which is enough for all of us to go around. However, there's hundreds of millions of people in the United States. We can get a bigger, piece of the eyes. So why not? Why,
Right.
Outside of quilters, quilts can still be cool. So that's what I think. Do it up.
Yeah.
So on many levels for me, it was unexpected to me to find so many what I consider great quilts. And I didn't care if anyone else thought they were great. I was having fun. I was, and
I
really
want to just fast scroll through all these beautiful quilts that you have here, and then we can dig into more of them later. But just to share with everybody the incredible breadth. You've said this one is your all-time favorite.
Yeah, it really did come down to that. It also is okay.
Is this one yo-yos?
Yes.
Oh.
There's a great story. Can I tell a story?
Yeah, tell the story about the yo-yos.
Okay. Mark French is one of these younger dealers that I discovered in Ohio, selling quilts. And a number of the quilts that ended up in my collection came through him, from him. This was a later quilt. I think I acquired it in 2012. And I really thought that I was done. And he contacted me and said, I've got a great yo-yo quilt for you. And I said, there aren't any great yo-yo. I don't want to see it. I'm not interested. There just were not any great yo-yo quilts ever made. He said, I'm not going to send you a picture. I'm going to put it in a box. I just think you should see it. And I said, okay, fine. And I'll look at it and then I'll return it to you. Well, open up the box and I'm seeing the back. And what I'm seeing is a backing. It was a plain muslin backing, but oh, yo-yo quilts aren't supposed to have a backing. They don't have backings. This one did. And I turn it over and I mean, I just wanted to drop on the floor, hung it up on my quilt wall, turned it all 4 directions just to see what do I like the best. And I just was, oh my God, I have never seen a yo-yo quilt like this. And it just, again, it's one of those quilts that to me that just, it transcends bed covering, quilt. It's just a complete work of art.
Now,
And
Roderick, these roses that are on it, are those appliqued on top of the yo-yos?
they are,
Okay.
She cut out of a store-bought bedspread, a
Mhm.
rose, just like an 1850s or 60s fine applique quilt, where she cut her roses and other flowers out of expensive chintz fabric and
Mhm.
perfectly cut them and appliqued them on. I'm sorry there's not a detail here, but I mean, she just kind of, they're not cut right to the edge. and I don't want to say plop them on, but I mean, the 2 roses are right in the center. And then there's 4 more around that center.
Mhm.
But Laura Otto made this. She wrote on the back her name, her age, which I think was in the 60s. I don't have all of my details here. I'm sorry. Her address in Fairview Park, Ohio, and the date, 1964. Thank you, Laura Otto, for
That's
letting us know who you were. I found her in census records. I've not gone into, like, could I find family and relatives? I just haven't gone down that road yet. My preference would be a nice somebody working in a museum who's charged with that.
Mm.
But if you look at the center of it, it's the pink and yellow circle. And if you follow that around, it's open. It doesn't close. And then all of those other little circles, yo-yo circles, are flying out of it. But the way she, color shade drew those circles radiating out, I think is brilliant.
Oh,
It
yeah.
looks like it could be an early Italian, like Roman, Greco or Roman tile floor or something. But to see it in person, to see the fabrics, the color, how she arranged her colors, brilliant. I did not send it back to Mark French.
Yeah. Well, that's
Wow.
But
yeah. Show us some more. Give us a zoom through.
this is go back.
Hang on, no, let me just show them all.
Okay. And then do we want to wait to
This
see
one
what?
I like grunted when I
Yes, I loved her.
when I was pulling them up to put them in the PowerPoint late last night. This like, guttural sound came out of me. This one just thrilled me, and I think maybe it's partly it has some things in common with how I made my scrap quilt recently, where sometimes there's a traditional block snuck in there, other times
Right.
it's convenient. Where'd you get this one?
I found it on eBay. It's out of Virginia. I broke my own rule. This was made pre-1950. I think I dated it. I mean, there's fabrics in there that are late 1800s. It was probably made in early 20th century, but it could be 1890 to 1900.
Wow.
To me, it's an unconventional and again, unexpected quilt. It can be argued every quilt is unconventional or unexpected, but I don't, that's been the argument that I've heard on every quilt is unique. But many quilts were made of traditional patterns. They were made perfectly, everything matches up. They could be quilted perfectly and beautiful. That just rarely excites me. Now, there was this perfect applique and piece quilt in the Fabric of a Nation show that I just went gaga for. And it's not that I don't like perfectly made quilts, but just my interest or my focus on this exploration that I made through eBay and other private dealers was, could I find quilts that just really excited me and that I saw connections to modern and contemporary art? And, they just kept coming in. They kept coming in. And like I said, I didn't expect to find that to be the case. And it was wonderful that it has. I was grateful how the book project, Unconventional, Unexpected, originally came to be. Being now on the internet and initially somewhat Facebook, but more Instagram is what I like to because of the more visual side of it, but realizing I can share these all over the world. And then it's been just extremely exciting to me to see the influence that the book has had. I mean, all of the books have had, but this one now on, in many cases, a younger generation of makers and who have been inspired by work. Other artists have told me that these designs are incredible. I can't believe they were done when they were done. And it just all can go into the mind and the mix. And some people like you, Heidi, others have come to me and said, I love the quilt on page such and such. May I make my own representation of it? And I said, please do. And then just please give the inspiration because I feel like that is important.
Yeah.
That lineage that goes all the way back through America's quilts, how people were inspired and made a quilt that they have seen. But it's exciting with the internet to have that. I wouldn't know all of you guys if it wasn't for that. And that's been very meaningful to me. I initially thought I was an old dinosaur that just had done his time in the quilt world.
No, welcome back.
But yeah, to realize that I still have creative interests and things that I want to do and am doing. I was devastated when Abrams decided they weren't going to reprint Unconventional and Unexpected, because I was watching on the internet so many people saying, I just learned about this book. Where can I get it? Oh, it's $700. It's $900. It's out of print. I'm grateful to libraries, and libraries bought the American quilt that so many people had access. I loved the library growing up in my hometown and finding books that, like you, Heidi, you found the book in a library and were able to use it. And but it just felt to me like there's still more life in this book. And thank you, quilt folk, And
Wow.
then they partnered with Schiffer, who were saying, oh my gosh, yes, we feel too that it has a longer life here for people to be inspired by the quilts. The essays in it are incredible. Carolyn Maslumi has written a beautiful foreword to this second edition. We've added some new quilts. I think there's 23. There were lots of quilts that I just could not put into the first edition of it. There was too many. I always kind of knew, oh, there's a second book, but
that's, yeah, there, you know what? I think we should send everyone home on a plug to get it. You can pre-order it, right, Heidi?
I pre-ordered it like a month ago, and I think it's going to arrive at my house in January now is the timeline.
yes, unfortunately, it was originally promised for Christmas for all the pre-orders. The supply chain or what's it called? You know, it's the books are done. I have a copy, but that was air freighted. They're on a ship someplace coming across, and then they'll sit in a port waiting to. And they had Quilt Folk had even built in extra time just for delays, and it's still. They were promised that they would have it for Christmas. So it's too bad, but it's here, or it's going to be here. It's available.
Unavoided, but exciting nonetheless. I'm super excited.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe an interesting question to close on would be kind of an echo of the way that Zak kicked us off, asking people in the chat about collecting and what do you collect. To me, it seems like such an interesting and important muscle to think about what Roderick was talking about, how yes, in a way, every quilt is unconventional and unexpected, but you can't put every quilt ever made in a book. You've gotta like sift through, distill things. I know from personal experience and from our previous episode where we gave a tour of Zak's house, like, you quilt in your kitchen. You can't buy every piece of fabric that was ever made. There you go. That's the kitchen. That's the studio. When I feel like maybe I relate more when I think about which fabric do I buy or not buy, like what do I let in my house? I am no longer in the phase of I need fabric. I'm in the phase of only the most special things will make it through the threshold of my front door. I've got to be, choosy rather than accumulating. Maybe we could each share a little something about like, where do you go when you decide, is this in or is it out? Is this going to be my 350th pair of sunglasses or not? Like even, Zak, you just bought some thread and you're kind of choosy about which threads you're going to grab. And maybe we could share that like everybody could share that in the chat too. It sounds like Joanne has that feeling with vintage coats. But if the four of us could share verbally and then everyone else could share in the chat a little bit about what is it that sings to you, or how do you know, how do you like, even if there's a place in your body where you feel it, that this is one I'm going to keep or put in.
Well, and I think one thing that's cool about that, sort of not to answer your question, editorialize even further, is just the more that you know about a thing. If you collect a thing, you see iterations of that thing that are more interesting. I look at everyone's sunglasses because I have a lot of them, and I will get ones that I've never seen before because I know enough about what it means to have seen them before, right? So, Roderick will have collected quilts that have never been seen before because he's seen enough to really know how that sort of becomes interesting. So the collecting is almost part of a research in a way to like understand something.
I like that. Zak, what are you feeling?
I would appreciate any help, any filters that anybody has out there, because I have a tough time with that. I bring in a lot of stuff. I think I'm just counting on making more quilts, use it up, bring that fabric in, but then push the quilts out. So we'll see.
Yeah, I find for me, when I'm thinking about adding fabric or even some of those questions that we talked about last month with Maura Grace Ambrose around, like, if I'm going to sell a quilt, how much is it going to cost to take that from me? Because that's also part of, I definitely collect Heidi Parkes quilts. I have a lot of them in my home. There are a lot of them that are not available for purchase in my shop page. But there's something that I feel like more in my body than in my head when I'm deciding, do I want to acquire something, or can I let something truly special go? I think even that feeling I had as I was uploading Roderick's quilt photos to our PowerPoint, it was like outside of my control when I gasped at that one. It's not a calculation that I make in my brain, that's for sure, about some of those things that I want or that I collect, or when I decide, yes, this is something that I love, I want to include it. It's interesting. Maybe I can make some mandalas about that idea even.
How did the three of you feel about selling your work?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Before we go to that question real fast,
Yeah.
Heidi, I really like the language that Anne Truitt, the sculptor, put on when she is looking at a piece of art and she's trying to determine, is it good, whatever good means.
Mm-hmm.
She looks for what she calls a spontaneous rise in her being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good way to some kind of a wave, some kind of bodily thing that takes over you. But I really like that language that she put to it.
Mm.
Yeah.
So Roderick, can you answer my question first? How do you know if it gets to be in the book, if it gets to be a quilt that you buy, that you add from eBay or from wherever else?
Well, the quilts were just gathered before there was any book.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted there to be a book.
Mm-hmm.
The publishing world has changed dramatically from when I did the American Quilt and Cloth and Comfort. I knew it was going to be a much harder road to hoe if I ever would get it published. I put together 2 blurb books just for the fun of editing, designing the pages. I was, being quirky with the design.
What is a blurb book?
Oh, a blurb is a self-published. It's one of the companies. You go online and there can be different templates that you use and just start putting pictures in. So, it reminded me of the Quilt Digest days of the showcase and how do these 2 quilts work together? Or I want to show, there are a number of themes that really came out as I started with these parameters, but then all of a sudden I started realizing, oh my gosh, there are all these quilts that I'm referring to as broken grids. I just had never seen those in my dealing days. The ones that I see an X in it, those just fascinated me. I love those. And then the backs. In being a quilt dealer in the late 70s, early 80s, nearly everything that I sold had a plain muslin back. It might have a printed fabric, but it'd be all at least like 2 big panels of it. Here, I was starting to see all of these pieced backs. These are incredible. Or the fabric, the flower sacking, feed sack material that got hand dyed. And one of them looked like a Rothko painting to me. Oh, isn't that interesting? And so I wanted to show the backs of the quilts. And there was one quilt in the book that I don't even show the front, because to me, the back is the work of art. It's just so incredible to my eye. So
there's a feeling of surprise or curiosity that it sounds like you're really getting at.
Yes,
Like,
yeah,
you see something
curiosity really
new
was
there.
the word. But, and at the same time, I knew from the very beginning, if I find something, if I find great pieces, I want them to be in museums. I feel like I want them there so that they can live on. I can't take them with me. I want these to become part of America's art history. I've often avoided going to the textile curator of a museum. Let's have the modern or the contemporary art curator look at these. How do these fit with all the other art that was being done at the same time? Or in some cases, before. I've got this incredible Pegasus quilt that's an old.
Love that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's pop art before Andy. It totally is. That woman was brilliant to take that gas station banner, applique it to the front of her quilt, patch the banner. I mean, just everything. It's a brilliant work of art. So
yeah, maybe I think you're exactly right. And it's in a lot of keeping with what you're doing, Heidi, and sort of like getting some art language into the world of quilting that maybe isn't as used to it. I mean, not that it's not there subconsciously, but put in the words to some of those actions. And I actually have to go, y'all. I'm having a good time, but we're over the hill. But
we've definitely arrived at longest soft bulk ever.
So maybe on the way out, we just sort of give everyone this kind of task to do a little, like contextualize your own work within art or quilts, and kind of, maybe your homework is look at 2 pieces of something that have inspired you, and how can that cycle work, or even just do some research and find some inspiration and put that into your work. So the way Roderick is sort of putting quilts in the context of art and Warhol, pre-Warhol, etc. Heidi is a good access to a lot of this language if you want to filter through some of her content or classes, etc. It's a really good way to start doing that. So maybe we run on a, hey guys, here's a homework.
I love that idea. Here's an
Let's talk
assignment.
about it next time, or online or email or whatever. I think it's a really cool ongoing conversation that I love to have, and I know Heidi is excited by it too.
Absolutely, yeah. And I feel like, don't be jealous of the art world from afar. If you want to engage with the art world, if you want quilts to be in more art museums and more art to be in the quilt and textile museums, like, learn about it, cultivate that language, research it a little bit, so that when Roderick says, oh, that reminds me of pop art, that you have a reference point and can make that connection. I think even, things like, oh my gosh, well, that's too big. That's another softball.
Don't say it. Don't say it. Thank you, Roderick. It's been brilliant. It's been lovely to see you, as always, shining through the screen.
We're ending.
So if we want, Roderick and I can hang out a little longer.
Yeah. Let's.
If anybody, let's see, are there people who want to stay with just me and Roderick? If so, put a little yes in the chat. But I think we've got some bedtimes rolling in.
How long has it been?
2 hours.
Oh my God! It just feels like minutes.
I mean, we're talking about our favorite things. That's how it happens.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
All right, we got.
I will say though,
we got. All right.
As a marker of time,
Zak say bye, and then we're gonna.
You've made a whole quilt.
Oh.
As a marker of time, I've hand sewn an entire quilt while we've been chatting. So this is soft bulk number 9 right here.
What's the H for?
Yeah,
Is
tell
that
me
an
about
H?
that H. That's for
Yeah.
Heidi.
Oh,
right?
it's
I gotta go, y'all. I think you're amazing.
Peace,
Bye,
Luke.
We'll all
Peace,
talk.
Luke.
Bye,
Really, really soon.
I didn't even know it was an H. It just came from this fabric.
Oh,
It's like a giant, like.
that can be an H for me.
But see, now, were you, as you were making it, it didn't even occur to you that was an H?
No.
You just put it in, yeah.
Yeah.
No, because I'm just sitting here listening, chiming in, and just kind of working intuitively and thinking more about color as opposed to that pattern. But
Oh,
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely an H, isn't it? Heidi.
Yes,
I know an H when I see one. That is not a letter I, that's for sure.
All right, y'all, this has been such a pleasure. Roderick, you want to say something?
I was going to ask if we could go to the blue X. I'd like to hear what participants.
Oh, cool. All right. Zak,
I always love. Yeah.
Roderick, you and I are hanging out longer. Zak,
absolutely.
we love you. As we piece out to Roderick's X, let's just look at Zak's background for a second, because there is a gorgeous, what's that quilt about? Who's that for?
I don't, a collector gave it to me and said, do with it what you will. They said it was from Texas, West Texas, I believe, like 1920s-ish, 1930s-ish, all hand sewn. She called it like a hired workers quilt or something like that. Roderick, are you familiar with that as a category?
I've heard, hired hands quilt is what I've heard. Hired hands.
That's probably what they said. Which the idea, I guess, is you're making this for somebody you've hired, like some maybe itinerant, maybe guest, maybe coming and going, but like this is a really beautiful quilt for like just a hired hand. You know?
Gorgeous. But that's the name of the pattern, is it's a hired hand? No.
It's the name of the recipient.
It's similar to the blue and white. Zak, have you ever taken the dust jacket off of Unconventional and looked at the actual covers of the
Do you have it right there? Can you show me?
Oh yeah, you've got it right there.
I got mine over here, but maybe you have yours.
No, I have the second edition, which has a new inside to it. A little unexpected.
A little unexpected treat if you take the cover off.
Yes. But a lot of people had no idea. I mean, that cover is so beautiful. And then go to the back of it. No.
Aha!
That came from Marjorie Childress's collection. And I think that hers is also a top. And I'm pretty sure it's West Texas.
Huh.
Oh, wow.
That's gorgeous.
But
I love her collection. I mentioned her in my recent blog post about quilt collecting when I was talking about this. Mr. Chili, Mr. Chili on Instagram. I love seeing what she's looking at.
Yeah, she has a great eye. So did you know that there were those underneath the dust jacket, Zak?
I did. I just didn't recall that particular one.
Yeah,
especially
that's what my mind came to when I saw that.
I love it. All right, y'all. I could keep on talking, but it is supper time in Brooklyn, New York. So, Roderick, thank you. Heidi, thank you. Everybody at home, thank you. We'll be sending out the recording, but Heidi will tell you about that one. Heidi.
Beautiful. We sure will. All right. Bye, Zak.
Y'all have a good night. I'll watch the rest of this later.
Sounds good. You'll watch later. Catch up with us. I love that we're still like 50 people strong, and we were at around 100 at one point. So there are plenty of people who are still in and who can snuggle up with us tomorrow on YouTube. So let's look at this favorite quilt of yours. I'm also loving how this one matches your outfit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I love when I speak to a group up in a quilt guild or other groups, and we'll be showing quilts, and then people from the audience will go, what's going on over in, the upper corner or in the middle or something? And I go, I've never seen that before. And I've looked at these, for forever. And we're folded up. This one now is at the International Quilt Museum, which I'm grateful for, but I hung it on the wall as I was packing all the others up just to live with it and look. I basically have never had walls or ceilings high enough in my homes that I could hang quilts on the wall. But I have a nice high ceiling. So it was fun to really just live with it, look at it. Again, I was seeing things in it that I hadn't really seen before, but I would be
Loving
curious.
this big fat one. Yeah, that blue,
Yes.
so much bigger. And then this little black bit, and then the red stripe down the side.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
is this a self-binding quilt? Because I see the the stripe at the top, and I wonder, is
In the
this one
bottom.
long stripe?
I I cannot remember what the back of that quilt is. I think the top and the bottom, that fabric is on the back. And I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure the red binding is just a red binding
A
on
separate
that
strip.
side. Yeah, and
'Cause
it's funny.
Wow. Yeah, Zak turned me onto that style of binding where you just wrap the back into the front.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, it's so easy. You don't have to use your ruler and cut all those strips and get the iron out and burn your fingers. So that it makes me think of that, but that's interesting that maybe it's not on the right there. It's a gorgeous
Are we
quilt.
getting any comments from people?
Yeah, we are. We are. Someone's asking about how do we find Mr. Chili, and she's linked on my blog. So if you go to HeidiParkes.com and then click on the blog tab, you'll see.
She's on Instagram.
Yeah, it's Mr. Chili, and then there's some numbers after that.
Right, right.
But definitely chili like the spicy jalapeno, not chili
Like New
like
Mexico
cold.
chili.
Yeah, and we have someone really enjoying the plaid and multicolored stripes. Oh,
Yeah.
good, Mr. Chili 9. Someone's put it in the chat.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let me pick one to ask you to tell a story about.
That one.
Okay.
No, the one before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That did come with a possible name of the maker, and I was finally able to verify it through census records. So it was made by Odie, O-D-D-I-E, Wright,
Mhm.
in Hale County, Alabama. Finding women in the census is hard. We don't know if their last name is their maiden name or their married name.
Mhm.
The back, and then it's brought to the front, the top binding, and down below, it's a yellow bed sheet, which I think is fabulous.
Yeah.
The fox hunt fabric,
Oh, yes.
I think, again, it is a bark cloth fabric, as I'm recalling. But it just beckons a call of what was she thinking, and why did she make it this way? My guess, of course, she had all these 9-patch blocks left over. Those plaid stripes, were those cut off of, like making someone's pants or something?
Right. Yeah. Were they
Um,
already that long, skinny shape, or did she cut them off the yardage to be just so?
Right.
That is a moment in a quilt that I find I'm always particularly drawn to, the way that a stripe will kind of curve, like as you quilt it and you spread it thin. Because I find you don't have to cut a quilt to be 100% flat and perfect, that the quilting will flatten it out a little bit. So you can get those wild looking curves because once you quilt it, they'll lay out, but the way they sort of swoop like that. Oh, I love that in a quilt.
Then in the middle, the horizontal bars, and red became a theme for me. I realized after quite a few quilts were in the collection, I was realizing, and then as I was looking at them and deciding online, it often was the color red. someplace in the quilt. I have some quilts that just have one piece of red, but to me, if it didn't have that red fabric in it, I might not have been as interested in it. There was just something about red that would
just
show
does
up.
something to you.
Yes, yeah. You know, and then the Albers painting, the square within a square within a square.
Of course, it's the Albers painting. Yes.
Then next to that, the red and white striped fabric. That
I love the way the stripe print echoes the pieced stripe.
Yes, yeah. It's not perfectly square. It's a little bit of, I don't remember my geometry now, what that shape might be, but you know, the top angles down from one corner to the next.
Yeah.
So it just, this wasn't in, this will be in the second edition. This wasn't in the first edition.
Yeah.
It was one of those wonderful quilts that just, you know, for a variety of reasons didn't make the cut. I mean, when we first designed the book, I was advocating, I put this everything, almost everything in it. So
just make a giant book.
And okay, let's start editing.
Yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous. Let me ask you, and if there are other questions, so Rosa has just said that the use of value in this quilt is wonderful. And I totally agree with that. Just seeing the abundance of them and them being making it all the way into a finished book, which always feels like such a nice, complete object. Could you share a little bit about photographing them? Did you photograph them all in what, you just brought all the quilts for the book? You photographed them all, or you had slowly taken photos of them as you acquired the quilts? Or and when they're photographed, do you find a lot of times they're laying on the floor and photographed from above, or do you put them on one of those angled things, or you put them on the wall? Share a little bit about the quilt photography.
Very, very fortunate to have met Sharon Reisdorf in San Francisco, who was photographing the Esprit quilts, the Amish quilts. So Sharon Reisdorf has worked on every single book project of mine.
Wow.
Which is just, I think, rare, lucky. We were in the beginning doing them on an angle board, but then she built platform in her studio, or planks across the top, and they were shot on the floor. So I would be down.
She was on the.
She was on
her
up
body
above.
Was above. Wow.
Yeah. And then I was on the floor laying them out and you know, straightening them and just assisting in any way from below. But no, I made when we did the American quilt, it took 2 years to photograph all the quilts. Most of them were sent to me because I knew they were just going to be better photographs.
Right.
If I could control as much of the photography. There was a group that was photographed in LA with a different photographer. But I made the decision, and I'm grateful for that, to start photographing the unconventional and unexpected quilts. As I got a group, I would go to her, and just so that we had those. And
in the queue. Yeah, you had them ready.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, all of it before were 4x5 transparencies. Film. It was film.
That's not quite a slide, but from that era.
Yeah, they're big. That's how really great photos were taken of any art and published. So I do have 4x5 transparencies of a lot of these quilts. Well, then it switched to digital, and she was slower to come to digital because you do get a better photograph from film than digital. But so all of those transparencies had to be rephotographed on the digital format, and then everything from then on was digital. In the first edition, there was one other photographer that came in. Sharon said she wasn't as interested in doing the detail shots. And so I found another photographer who helped me with those and did those. And then for Unconventional, Unexpected, unfortunately, Sharon has retired. Couldn't convince her. Well, she sold her studio.
Oh.
So that space
doesn't have the boardwalk anymore.
Right. So I did find a new young photographer and who did the quilts that hadn't been photographed that I had acquired. I made the mistake, it was during the pandemic. I went back on eBay again. I hadn't been on for years. And I was just curious again, what's out here? What's being sold? And, I couldn't help myself and got a few new ones. And then I borrowed a piece from Marjorie Childress. It was actually a top that I had originally found, and I sold it to her. I think I gave it to her. She came once and we exchanged a bunch of yeah. So it was a top that I really liked. So I'm using that. It seemed like I borrowed another one, but yeah, there were some new quilts to the collection that got photographed by a new photographer that will be, and then.
Okay, so a twin question is, how do you store all of these quilts?
Very fortunate that in San Francisco, there was what was originally an old milk barn behind our 2-flat building. Noe Valley were the dairy farms of San Francisco. There are photographs of old farmhouses. Some of those still exist in neighborhoods, but this was a old milk barn, fabulous old building. And they're on tables and elevated platforms. So they get folded very little. These also, a lot of the quilts are thicker than quilts that I, again, was familiar with.
Than average. Yeah.
Than average. They have thicker battings and they do get unfolded and folded. They go to exhibitions, or that's a lot of times they're rotating around. So they're getting unfolded and folded, but I've been really grateful and amazed at how I've not gotten fold lines that just don't come out, but I try to lay them out with as few folds as possible. One quilt is on a roll that's hung.
One time, have you also been to the Michigan State University?
I have not. I've never been to that facility, and
I was very lucky to get to go on a tour there in 2015 when I was in Michigan for my artist residency that I did in Michigan called Have Company with Marley Grace. She had a friend, Micah Ling, who was working at that museum. And so she took me for the day, and they have these huge lockers and the quilts are on rolls. So you open up this locker and you pull out, and it's like maybe 5 rolls deep.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, 15 rolls tall, but you pull, it's like a drawer, and then you pull the roll, and it's just an incredible system for storing quilts. Very strategic in terms of space and keeping them on a roll.
I also know here in Wisconsin at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Art, due to space and there's the way that they do it is they have acid-free boxes,
Right.
and they fold them in boxes, and they make sure they fold them a different way each time.
Correct.
And they
Yeah.
have the acid-free paper. So they put the tissue paper, the acid-free tissue paper,
Right.
at the crease to keep it from
Yes. So it's
merging there.
rolled over. It's a
Right.
flat fold.
Yeah. Well, I know for so many people, even just the way you fold the quilt is like big deal and controversial. Do you fold it in half and in quarters and you get that plus sign in the middle, or you
Yes,
fold it
I
on the
love the plus.
diagonal?
No.
I tend to, when I'm packing them up to go, teach where I want to bring a lecture and do a trunk
Right.
show. So I fill up one suitcase with quilts and another suitcase with my clothing and my sewing supplies and stuff.
Right.
And I try to just do it different each time. So maybe on the way there, I fold them front to front in a square. And then on the way home, maybe I fold it on the diagonal where I fold the back to the back of the quilt, just to keep playing with, is it front or back? Do you have a favorite? And then I also, if it's up to me, like recently when I went to install my exhibition here in Wisconsin, I have some big bags. So I tried to just put them loosely crumpled in the bag because I was going to unfurl them and hang them on the wall. And I didn't want to have that sharp crease. So to me, that's my favorite way, is just plop it in a loose bag where it doesn't have to have that tight packed quality that you have to do when you're using a suitcase. Do you have a favorite?
I've never thought, I do have some big soft-sided bags, but I always fold them. I never thought of plopping them.
That's what, like, if I really care about the quilt, I just plop it in. I mash it like I'm crumpling a piece of paper for the waste bin. and that's when I show I really care.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Rosa is asking about if quilts get hand washed or take to the dryer. I don't often wash there are plenty of my quilts that have never been washed before. If I were to wash a quilt, especially one that's not brand new, I feel like I would, do some Googling first, because I'm not an expert in that realm. But then maybe I would wash it with some Dawn soap so it didn't bleed in the bathtub, and just gently swish tiniest amount of soap, and then let the tub drain and fill it up again and let it drain and fill it, just to not be wringing it out too harshly.
Right.
And then I would try to let the tub drain, squish out the water. And then it would have to be the summer. I'd probably put a bed sheet on the grass and then lay it out in the sun. I wouldn't tumble dry it, but that would be probably the most gentle way that I'm able to think of. But I would probably lean more towards vacuuming it. I know I talked about that recently somewhere else, where I would use the soft bristle part of a vacuum. I think just vacuuming a quilt gives it a good freshen up without the danger. What are your thoughts on washing?
There are instructions in the back of the American Quilt on how
really?
Yeah.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
And this summer I decided that I was gonna just like, it kind of is fun and relaxing, meditative thing to do. There were a couple of quilts that came in that I often would kind of segregate. They had some dirt to them. So I thought, I'm gonna wash them. Summer day, bathtub, mild detergent. And I think that Orvis used to be a product that was recommended, but I think that's, you buy that in, it's like for washing horses.
Oh, wow.
So you have to have some kind of a store that.
Farm and Fleet.
Yes. But I think Dawn, but just a little bit of soap. You don't want it soapy. fabric is at its most vulnerable when it's wet.
Mhm.
And the bathtub, just very cool, tepid water.
And just a gentle little massaging. You
Yes,
don't need to
just
try to spin
patting.
cycle it or
No,
wring it out.
pat it down.
Mhm.
I was shocked. The water looked like dark tea after the first 2 or 3. And like you say, you let it run out. And again, you can gently pat the water out, fill it back up, pat it, and just wait until the water is clear.
Mhm.
And I've kind of gently then rolled it in the tub and get it into, kind of roll it and then kind of third. So it's a smaller blob to grab a hold of, and have either big towels out on the bathroom floor to just lift that up and put it into a towel. Again,
Mhm.
you're not picking the whole thing up because that weight. And then, like you said, sheet
Yeah.
on the lawn. If it's a white, again, this is, antique or vintage quilts. If it does have a white or cream colored background, that can be exposed to the sun because the sun is a great bleacher.
Yeah.
And or covering it, trying to find a shady spot, putting another sheet over it. And then it
That's
takes,
smart. And you would probably put it front down.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
front down, and then put another sheet on top. Yeah.
And then in the beginning, again, depending on the age of it, you would want to take a fabric, predominantly reds or just a dark fabric, and just tap it into I do a little bowl of cold water,
Mhm.
just to tap and just see if that color starts running down. Then you don't want to wash it because you don't want that running into. But by the 50s on, generally the fabrics were color fast, so you
Mhm.
don't have to worry. But it's wise to test. A lot of what women talk or writings, they hung their quilts on the clothesline and
Yeah.
aired them out. They weren't putting them in
They didn't get
washing.
them wet. They just hung them, and they got to.
But then if there's a quilt that you're using and you want to use and you don't care and you need to put it in the washing machine and wash it in the dryer and put it back on the bed.
Oh, there are quilts that I've made that like my nephews have pooped on, and they go throw them in the wash and put them on the bed again, and they're just fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's helpful to know what your intention is for the life of your quilt. I like to share in some of the classes that I teach that especially when I'm finishing a quilt, there are a lot of cues that I can use to teach people how to treat that quilt. Certainly a real obvious one is if I sew a sleeve on the back, I'm telling them what to do with it.
Yeah.
But even just the way that I bind it, if you're doing a binding on the bias, that's going to hold up in the tumble dry way better than a back to the front or a binding strip, but not a bias cut binding strip. I also think the labels, the way that a quilt's signed, is a really good way of telling people, literally or even not, just the fact that you put your name on it, I think gives that little hint of what might and the size. If it's the perfect dimensions for a bed, then maybe it's a bed quilt. But if it's not, the scale of it, I think, is a really interesting way to tell people what to do with it.
This question just came into my mind. Do you ever make a quilt where you don't have necessarily a top and bottom, that you just make it and then maybe at the end decide what's top and bottom?
I've had a couple quilts where I was piecing it thinking I knew this is the top, this is the bottom. And then between piecing and quilting, I realized, it's sideways. It is actually much better. The one that I remember that with the most vividly is a quilt called Night Flight #2.
It's about looking at the window of an airplane and kind of getting close to the airport. So seeing all of those lights. And I was working a little bit off of a photograph as I was making it, which is unusual for me, at least lately. So I would have, for that one, I was looking at a photo and then I realized actually as a quilt, it is much, much better sideways and not based on the photo that I was looking at. But that would be a fun challenge. I find when I make quilts, I love giving myself a little set of rules or a little like boundaries to push against, and making something not knowing what the top or bottom is would be a very interesting.
Yeah, well, I was thinking in terms of that I made the decision. The quilts came to me, I hung them on a wall. Generally, I'll always hang them horizontally, vertically, the long ways. And then I'm just look at it 90 degrees and 90 degrees and keep turning it and decide for my eye what I like the visual. And it's often then easier once it's photographed on the computer to rotate it. But there's something too about seeing it in person, but realizing I don't know how the maker had intended. And again, sometimes I think it's obvious, but
I'm thinking that too, just when I was mentioning signing it, like once you signed it, you very much declared top.
Right. And then sometimes I'll determine how I think what's top and bottom and whether it's horizontal or vertical. And but it has to be turned in the book in term for design wise. It just doesn't work the way. And it's been fun to see. Sometimes that's really, I like it that way. It's interesting to see it that way. And they're just kind of those options. But yeah, it just, not being a maker myself, thought of, I mean, I envision and see a lot of makers design wall and starting at the top and working down or whatever, but
I remember hearing Mr. Chili talking about the same thing of trying to figure out what is the orientation of the quilt. She shared, it was at QuiltCon when I heard her give a lecture in person. She shared that a lot of times she will put it on a bed to help herself figure out what the orientation is as well. That when it's at that horizontal, but not the same as a floor, that something about that helps.
Right.
I find that I forget to be suspicious of that when I look at a book like yours, to think like, that was just Roderick deciding what the top was. Like I could spin the book around and like just re-experience even what that's like. To consider which side is the top in that kind of after the fact sense where the maker isn't around to tell you what the top is.
Right.
Judith just shared that for her, some of the beauty is in the patina of use. So rather than assuming that it needs to be washed, that can add a lot that's beautiful to it. I find that too, that sometimes that's why fabrics speak to me, why I want to use them, is because they'll have a stain or a mend, or they'll be from clothing, that some of that history in the fabric is why I want to put it in a quilt.
Yeah, I mean, and I realized too, as I was acquiring them, that it was often that patina or the realizing these have been slept under. Maybe they've been washed once or twice, but they have been used. That there's just something about them. If I see a vintage quilt that sometimes that's kind of too clean, it doesn't have the same, I don't have the same connection to it. And for me, sometimes in looking at contemporary quilts, newly made quilt, I realize, I mean, it's different. it's a different reaction and all, but sometimes it's like, oh, like, give me that little patina on it.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful way to think about it. I want to change gears and ask you a different kind of question.
Yes.
I find for the work that I do, I have to do a lot of writing, artist statements, email newsletter, blurb describing how a class is, that kind of thing. And sometimes writing can be a challenge for me to like, how do I orient myself here at the computer? Having written so many books and done also so much writing about the book, and the same way you had to ask people to write a foreword for your book, what are some of your practices around writing and being a writer? Like, is there a place where you find more success with, like, I find I'm not the best at writing on a desk. I usually have to go put myself like in my bedroom to write and have bad sleep hygiene. But or is there a time of day, or would you rather write for 2 hours every day or spend one long day writing? Like, how do you deal with that animal of writing?
I basically hate to write.
Yeah, it's the worst.
And with the Quilt Digest, Michael Kyle was the writer. He was a really great writer. He did the editorial side and worked with the writers and all. I did what I liked, the design and the visual. I got a call from Clarkson Potter, who published The American Quilt, and senior editor there. And she said, we'd love for you to write the Quilt Bible for us. And I said, my response was, no, thank you. And there was a real pause on the other line. And it was all about, fear of writing, of like, I love to research, but the writing part of it, there are so many other people that are so gifted and skilled. She said, are you going to be in New York anytime soon? I said, well, yeah, actually, why don't you come in and talk to us? And when I hung up, I realized, what did I do by saying no? And that she didn't just say, okay, thanks. Later, I thought, well, maybe that was a good tactic, that they were, playing hard to get. But I went into them and said, I don't consider myself a writer. The visual, I know, the quilts and design and how I would organize the book. And they were saying, oh, that's no problem. We'll get you a writer. So I have worked with great writers. I'll do research, I'll do kind of rough drafts, and then somebody else takes my mind and my ideas and crafts it into something that's readable, that people want to read. Mary Elizabeth Johnson did a beautiful job of writing the text for The American Quilt. Again, taking my research, what I wanted to say, and then filling it out. And of course,
you just talk to her, or you talked to her and recorded it so she could go back later? Or how did you transmit that?
I did a lot of rough drafts on things, on different sections and all. And we met together in Alabama and worked together and talked. Of course, with Unconventional, Unexpected, I knew I want to get other people to write, just because, I wanted to bring in multiple voices of people who I respected, different backgrounds, artists, curators, museum people, makers, and have them struggle with or not. I got help with my intro just because it's, I always need, I think any good writer needs a good editor. So I have to be inspired and sit down, but I'm not, I don't have any great practices. And, for a long time, I felt guilty about that. And I just thought, hey, forget it. That's not I have other skills and talents, and you find good writers and good editors to work with. So
I for about 6 months, ago, I was working with a career coach person who was just fabulous. And we would talk about the things that were a struggle for me. And then she'd kind of rephrase the question, but be like, how would you do that if you were making a quilt? And it was just the most incredible shift in perspective for me to start to be better at different things, or to think about them in a different way. Because hearing you share about solving that problem with writing reminds me exactly of how I love to make a quilt. If there's a problem, like a time crunch or a deadline or anything that comes up in the realm of quilting, I see that problem as an incredible opportunity. So hearing you talk about writing, well, let's have other people help write and give them a spotlight in the book. And it's
absolutely.
a genius thing to do, because then you have multiple people advertising, look, I helped with this book. Right. It's not just yours. You've got lots of people in the party. Same way as it's a benefit to do a group show of quilts rather than a solo show of quilts. That way, lots of people are spreading the word. And then you don't have to do all that writing. And people are delighted because that's their thing they're good at. That's,
right.
Yeah, to just turn that problem on its head and to make it the thing that makes the book great, instead of something you've got to fight against.
Right. I've always loved the collaborative process. And yeah, it's getting over, again, the kind of that perfectionism that I talked earlier about. It can just be deadly when it binds us and strangles us, when realization of there are a lot of creative people out there who want to help, want to participate, get over the guilt. Oh, I'm a terrible writer. I'm embarrassed. I can't say. I'm just like, hey, that's just the truth. And you find the good people and create a team. My books are always filled with huge acknowledgments of everyone that participated. It's not just, oh, look what I did. It's look what we all did. And yes, I had the good fortune to kind of be the team leader, or have my name on the book. I still, I'm happy. I'm fine with the word author, but when people say he's a writer, I go, no, visionary. And I have, I'm a visual person, but love to put together a great team of people, and then and it's just more people involved and who want to let people know they're involved with this project, and spreads the word around.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything that you would like to ask me, or any other questions that you feel like, when people ask you about the book and stuff, that there just isn't time to get to the thing you really wanted to talk about? Is there another topic you'd like to roll out as we encroach on our third hour? Because I feel like it's kind of a sweet spot of like, oh, we can just be relaxed and talk about, the things that don't come up when you're not in a rush.
I was really glad I asked you the question about the top and bottom. That was very spontaneous. Well, I guess I am curious about young artists who are creating, and how the process of, some people don't want to sell their work. Others do, but don't feel comfortable doing it, or how do I do it? And I'd be curious just to hear more of what you want to share, if you want to share anything around that process of, is it easy for you to price your pieces and send them off to curators or send them to a gallery? Please represent me or show my work or
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I know that when I first got started with changing careers, because I was a high school art teacher for 9 years. That's what I studied when I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I then, in 2013, September, made a quilt. 9 months later, quit my job to become a full-time quilter. I was a combination of so smitten, and I felt like a frog in boiling water with my job. I had always loved teaching art, and I finally realized, like, this is not the same job that I was doing 9 years ago. They had me traveling between 2 different high schools, and I was so spread thin. And when they told me, we're going to do this to you again next year, I thought, or I can quit, because that's the only thing that I can do. I was also starting to feel frustrated with the way that the pay scale worked in teaching, that so much of it is about get a master's degree, then you can't leave our school district, because to get hired somewhere else, you're going to have to even fight for them to acknowledge that you have a master's degree, and you're so expensive, it's really hard to get hired. So it's this sort of commitment of, then you no longer have the freedom to say, well, I'll leave and go teach somewhere else, in a lot of ways. So I was at this point with my career as a teacher of feeling like I'd paid off my loans. I had some financial stability because I had a salary, but I was also feeling like I can see the rest of my life laid out before me in a way that feels kind of frustrating, and that I would like to be able to choose if I'm going to travel or not travel. And I'd like to choose if there's potential to make more than my salary each year, like more than the pay scale stacked before me, or not. So that's a little bit of the picture of where I was when I changed careers. And it was a really interesting thing around pricing quilts and deciding when it makes sense to sell them or not sell them. For me, as a little kid, I was the one playing teacher in the basement. My dad installed a chalkboard in our basement so that we could play teacher. So this is a deep, deep part of who I am, is I love to teach. And still, one of the compliments that just makes my heart like swell is when I get told that I'm a good teacher, that it's been easy to learn from me, that imparting of knowledge thrills me. I think maybe in a similar way that for you, you go through the work of putting a book together because it's a thrill to open someone's mind to how big what a quilt can be, or a different way of looking at something.
Right.
So I knew that I still loved that about teaching. And when I was looking at, do quilters exist is a quilter a job that I could go for? Could I be a quilter? Looking out at that world, I saw a lot of people who were making a living with the teaching side of it. And I thought, I know how to teach. I love teaching. It gives me goosebumps to teach. So I thought, with that as a little bit of freedom, and also for 7 years, I was an assistant to a ceramic artist. So I knew what it was like to be making things to sell them. I know I can sell this at this price at this art fair. And I didn't want to be in that race of making things just to sell them. I wanted to make quilts because I was curious about them. And the more quilts I made, the more I realized, oh, I'm making really expensive fine art quilts. I am not making things that are fast enough that they can be at a price point that makes sense for that other side of our industry.
Right.
So I thought, I want to make the very best quilt that I know how to make. Every time I sit down to make a quilt, I want to be pushing myself because I'm excited about how I'm making it and what it will look like, I don't want it to be for the money. I don't want to be cutting corners. I don't want to be quilting it less densely so that it can be less expensive, so that maybe then someone will buy it. Like, I knew I did not want to be playing that game in my head. So then that left me with teaching quilting and making quilts. And it's to my advantage of as a teacher to have some quilts still in my possession, to be able to pack up a suitcase and go do a trunk show or teach. That's part of the thrill, is you get to touch someone's quilt or see it in person. Like, you know, all the questions we were asking you just now with your PowerPoint are those flowers appliqued on top of the yo-yos? How is that red stripe wrapping around the edge? Like, that's what people love when they take a class and they get to see a quilt in person. So I felt great about not feeling in a rush to sell my quilts, but also with my experience of being a ceramic artist and other kinds of art and quilts, they're not living their best lives if they stay with me at home forever. I really do feel like that there's a mirror to that experience of being like a child. Like, I'm the mom, and at a certain point they need to leave the nest, and that is them living their best life as a quilt, whether it's to be in someone's home or to be in a collection or a museum or somewhere else. And when I'm pricing things, then I'm thinking about, how do I know they're going to a good home? Are they going to live their best life at that price? And also, at what point am I going to look back and feel regret that I sold that quilt for that price? Or am I going to feel like, yes, I do miss that quilt. I wish I could look at it again, but I feel good about where it got me. And I feel good about the way that the new owner respects that quilt and cares for it. And there's kind of a sweet spot there in the middle. I shared in one of our previous talks with Maura Grace Ambrose about a formula for pricing quilts of kind of working backwards of what's a reasonable amount of money to make as a yearly salary, and then kind of chugging back around retail versus wholesale. And then what am I making an hour? And also, if I'm not giving 50% of the sale to the art gallery, then am I maybe then getting compensated in that moment for the work that I put into Instagram and my email newsletter and taking photos and all the other labor that I do to create value for the work? Because that's a shared job. For some people, the gallery does all of that work. I do some of that work that adds value that then I don't have to sell all my quilts for 50% when I'm not, and certainly I would never want to undercut a gallery or that betray that relationship, because we want to make sure that, a quilt has the right value. I found, though, it's really unpleasant timing myself when I make a quilt. For a while, when I first started, I just had no idea where to begin. So I had an app and I would time how long did it take to make that quilt. And now it feels more like, well, how many days did it take, or how many weeks or months did it take to make the quilt, versus tracking the hours and having a base of this amount of labor on the sewing machine or by hand or this size. I feel much better leaning into an art world model that says this kind of quilt from Heidi Parkes is worth this amount of money. And then this kind of quilt from me is worth a different amount of money. So it's not, oh, this one is $3,475 because of the extra 5 minutes that I spent doing this thing or that thing. And that kind of standardization really works for me. And that way then, like, all of my little quilts, here's one that's not done yet, but a small quilt this size, they're all $250. And if one of them came together real fast, that's
that's an awesome win for me. I had a stroke of genius that made it faster.
Right.
And conversely, if I spent a lot of time on it, maybe I eat it on that one a little bit. But to me, it's a really satisfying feeling that size, that approach to making, they're all just the same. I like that I don't have to hem and haw about it. I like that it's part of a series, and they just are that price. I find that fits with that art world feeling a little bit more, rather than like counting up every minute that was spent to make it.
Right.
Yeah, I love when they go to a good home, and it's such a cool feeling to get to, some of the people who've purchased my quilts, I get to see the quilts in their home because I know them. Right now I have 6 quilts, that like small quilts, that I wrapped up from the sale that I'm doing, and they're on the way to the post office. And all of them, I wrote a handwritten letter with, for so-and-so and the date, and thank you for making a home for the quilt. And then I put its title, and I share a couple tidbits, like, that's from a skirt that I used to wear, or I made this quilt for this show, or the fabric is from a trip that I made, and just a little something to seal the provenance of the quilt. And they have titles, they have the year, they have the story behind them. And those are all things that I think add to the value of a quilt, and like, why is the quilt from me worth what it's worth? Yeah.
And then it still is available to you for a show or publication. That was the case with when Michael, Kyle, and I were selling quilts. I mean, we found some really great quilts and put them into great homes, and then start doing Quilt Digest. Oh, would you I'd like to borrow that quilt back for a publication. Generally people are, oh my gosh, yeah. Same
They're
with
delighted. Yeah, it adds value to their collection.
Right.
It's the
American Quilt. A lot of quilts in that book came from collectors where I'd placed the quilts with. So, they're still there. They were available because, some people would say to me at times, well, how can you stand to sell those quilts? And it's like, well, I mean, it's a business. I am making a living from this, but I'm putting them I'm not considering them just merchandise or a commodity, but putting them into a good home. And then I do have access at some point, ideally, down the road. And the same with you.
Yeah, and making sure you take a good photo before you sell it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's such a, when the pandemic first began and I had to cancel a bunch of workshops, and I was just feeling so sad because it was all my time and energy and money away from sewing that went into selling the work. Like, I was supposed to teach in France, and I was so excited about it, and I'd spent a lot of time selling that class, making it a sold out class, and to then have to cancel it was like, all my work, and now I'm not getting paid for this, and it's just gone. And I went back and did a lot of sewing. It was a very productive time sewing for me, and it just felt so good to feel like I'm working on something that no one can ever take away from me. Because even if I sell that quilt, I still have the photo of it. It's still part of my history as a maker and as a quilter.
Right.
And it was just such a good grounding of feeling of, once I've made a quilt, it's always mine. I always have it.
Right.
And it's a beautiful feeling to be able to sell a quilt and know that it's still mine, and also to invest my time in something that is so, like belonging to me. And I think that's something I was missing when I was an art teacher and I was getting bossed around, and every art teacher is the same as every other art teacher, and we can just send you to this other school and you can teach any kind of art, ceramics or drawing or photography or computer graphics, and it's just all the same to them. And it didn't feel all the same to me.
I also, to answer a little more of your question, right now, I love getting to exhibit in art galleries and in museums. And I've done a little bit of curating, and I'm even starting a new, actually like 2 curatorial projects are kind of in the back burner, in that secret phase still.
Great.
And I also have decided that I'm not in pursuit of having a gallery represent me in that very official way. I feel as though I'm able to sell enough of my work myself and support myself that I don't need that long-term help. And generally the contracts that I'm aware of for galleries, if I sell a quilt all by myself, I still have to give the gallery 50%. It's not just half of the money of the ones they sell. It is, if they represent me, every time my work is sold, they get half and I get half. And
I did not realize
that. I did not realize that either
Huh.
till I got close enough to maybe be, I thought I really wanted to be represented by a gallery. And then I got close enough to finally, being there, and I realized, wow, maybe it's not as much as it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, it seems like that's changing a lot in all throughout the art world, that again, now with the internet, that artists do have more ability to sell it themselves.
Yeah.
And being in a gallery isn't necessarily the road to success or.
Yeah. For a long time, I kind of, yielding to the art world and the way that things are set up, I had the gallery images of my quilts on my website, but I did not have a shopping cart set up. And then I kind of dipped my toe in and I was like, well, list the price and say, you can email me if you want to buy one. But I was hesitant even to do that, because if you're in the gallery world, you just have the pictures of the work, no information about how to sell it. It's got to be shrouded in mystery.
Right.
And so I've been very slowly deciding, maybe I like being more autonomous and realizing I'm not looking to be represented by a gallery. Therefore, it makes sense for me to have a shopping cart on my website. So it has been a labor of love the last 3 months to upload everything, get it. Like, building a website is so much work, so much time away from sewing quilts. But now it's a really cool feeling that a lot of my quilts are for sale on my website with the shopping cart. You can just check out and it's yours. And that's not something I was dreaming about 4 years ago. I was feeling like maybe I wanted more of a gallery angle. And I love that I still get to be part of the art gallery system. And there's so much that's really special about that system. And I love going to gallery openings, and I love that I have work in a gallery right now. It's such a delight to see quilts in that setting with the, I can't create that here in my living room.
Right.
I can photograph a quilt and I can make a shopping cart on my website, but I can't have a show right here. And so it's an interesting dance and kind of fun to try that shopping cart thing out now. But it speaks to what you were mentioning about as well, as how the internet is changing things so much. And for me as a teacher of quilting, things are so different now too, that I can teach a class right here in my living room at my Zoom station. I couldn't do that 3 years ago. And now it's a different financial system if I can sell a class all by myself. And it's more work, different kinds of work, but it also means I don't have as many meetings. I don't have to drive. They don't have to put me up in a hotel. It's fascinating to see the way that some of those models are shifting right now.
Yeah, and the thought just came to me that possibly if you establish your selling history, or contracts with anybody are negotiable. Maybe it's negotiated with the gallery. No, anything that I sell on my own, we're just
Yeah,
And
exactly.
maybe galleries that don't operate on that. Excuse me, I just checked my battery and realized, and
That's part of why Luke was in such a
Zoom,
hurry to get off.
my Zoom setup, I rely on natural light, and the light has faded and it's getting more. This has been great.
Yeah. Oh, we had a
And
couple of really
I have to admit
lovely.
that
Yeah.
after we get off, I will be going to the bathroom.
I know,
But-
me too. I see Jill laughing at that one.
Are there questions from our remaining? Thank you for the people that have stuck to the very end.
We just got a beautiful comment from Joanne who has her video on. We can see her working away. She said she's loving this conversation. And then I hope I pronounce it. I think we've met before, but Chandra Wu is saying, I'd love to hear what you both think about pricing quilts as art objects for current makers, especially those of us without arts degrees and marketing experience. And then Ruth just shared that this has all been fascinating. So yeah, Chandra, your question I think is such a good one. And I've had other, like my friend Amanda Nadig, who's newer at making quilts than I am. She reached out to me a while back and was saying, where should I start with pricing my quilts? And I think, go to Amanda Nadig's Etsy shop and see what her prices are. She's a really great example of someone, a little newer at selling quilts, and she's been selling them. I love watching her Instagram and seeing when she does those glorious posts of like, this is off to its new home. So I think, the same way you've done a lot of perusing eBay, perusing Etsy is a really interesting way of seeing where is the market with valuing quilts right now and with quilters valuing their own quilts. And I think sometimes I go on Etsy and I just feel like, wow, I know what went into making that quilt. Are they charging $2 an hour? Maybe $1 an hour? Compared to then seeing other, like, where do they scale up where it seems like, okay, they're making minimum wage. I feel that like that's a cool place to be, making minimum wage with something that you like to do. I understand the interest in selling things for less than minimum wage as well. Some people just want to break even on materials. It's their passion. They're sewing away. They need a place to put them. It doesn't have to be. So there are a lot of interesting places to be in that arc of making quilts. And I don't, I'm certainly not interested in like shaming anyone for the price that they're choosing for a quilt or where, where they're falling there. I think there's space for, Luke was saying 22 million quilters. There's space for so many different ways of creating an exchange for a quilt. I think that's part of why it's so cool to see Luke giving quilts away.
Yeah.
In our last soft bulk, he was sharing about the most expensive quilt he's ever sold. And that one sold for $78,000. And like, how fascinating that someone who can make $78,000 on a quilt is giving them away on the side of the street. Like, that's so awesome. And then just like there is room for a lot of different models, or for auctioning quilts, or for it's just what kind of career are you looking to make, and how Luke impresses me that he puts so much effort into exhibitions. That is always the thing that he cares about the most. And sometimes they're tiring for me. I mean, it is not the coolest thing to have and as well, because you've exhibited things. Sometimes the artist has to, at least, I recently have been dragging my feet on an offer to have a solo show at a textile museum, because they reached out to me and they said, you can pay shipping both ways. You can provide everything for hanging them. We won't invest any money, but if you want to put this show up, you can. And I was like, I'm gonna have to think about that, because that's gonna be real expensive for me to be in your museum. And is there a point where that changes, where the museum pays at least? I mean, I'm more familiar with the venue at least paying one way. Like I pay to get it there, they pay to get it back.
Right.
Luke and I are both in the orange show that Joe Cunningham is curating. And I was like, I'm moving up in the world. They're paying for shipping both ways. Like that was super cool for me to not have to pay for any of the shipping to be in a museum show. But it's not easy financially or otherwise, like just time. It takes so much time to give the museum the photo they want, because it's of course also on the artist to pay for the nice photo. Right. The dimensions, the description, the emails back and forth, sending the contract PDF, like it's a lot of work to make no money, to just have a line on your resume or to have people see your quilt. So he's been playing the long game with that and finding other ways to pay the bills to work up to having that kind of exhibition record that he can charge what he charges. But do you sometimes get shipping paid for rather than having to pay about it?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah, that's for you. Yeah. Sometimes, so like, do you ever make money on a museum exhibition, or does it always cost money?
It depends. I always tried to, I have felt that it's important for the curator to have a budget provided by them and paid a fee. So yeah, I mean, it's tough that a lot what people are asked to do. And some of it, there's a building a reputation and working up to a place where then, yes, of course, everything's taken care of. But yeah, artists can definitely be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I found that even with teaching lately, there are some places that, I haven't worked with, so I'm not giving anything away, but there's some places that wanted me to teach a virtual class for them. And they wanted to give me 1/12 of the money that they were collecting for my class fees. And I was like, for something that I am doing in my living room, that is all my knowledge, that and clearly other people have said yes to them for that because they've taught a bunch of classes. But I thought I will not work for 1/12 of the student fees. So yeah, it's amazing. But I think, things like Etsy and like pricing, it's my mom majored in economics. She gets real into it. She's like, it's what people will sell it for. It's what the market will bear. So long as there are people who will say, yeah, sure, I'll teach a virtual class and get paid 1/12 of the student fees. If the people who say yes to that is why that happens. And, similarly with exhibitions and with galleries and just, like you said, maybe tell the gallery, you can represent me, but you only get money from the quilts that you sell. If I'm selling it, I get the money. And yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to have the courage to push back about things like that. But it's not always easy, and you don't always have the extra knowledge. I went to a really great art school. Never during my 4 years at art school did they explain that kind of thing about pricing, about gallery relationships.
Don't do that.
I graduated in 2005. I think maybe it's getting a little better now.
I don't know. I don't think so. I have friends who are teaching in those schools, and it's not a subject that's dealt with enough. Because those schools, whether like the really great schools to on down the list of a lot of people are going out there into the world with an art degree or an MFA, and it's a tough world out there or young artists, emerging artists, and so.
Yeah, but exciting also. I mean, I just, you know, I guess to wrap things up so we can both go to the bathroom. I mean, what, like,
charge
what
up the computer. It's now in the red zone.
if you drift off, we'll know why. But
Okay.
you know, I mean, to me, things like Instagram is, I see documentaries and other people griping about it, but to me, it's magic that I am able to invest in something that's all mine, that people can't take away from me, that allows me to get to know people like you and Luke and Zak. I mean, Zak and I, he's one of my best friends. I know him from Instagram. And you know, it's incredible to have that kind of ability to share our work. And you know, also systems like YouTube, like this video is going to be on YouTube, and you should like and you should subscribe, and it helps me out. I just recently hit the space with YouTube where I'm getting monetized now, and I'm not making a ton of money yet, but like some is cool. And it's part of why.
What am I going to make off of it?
I'll tell you, you know, I think I made like $10 on the last soft bulk. So we'll try and split that to 4 ways. I'll send you $250.
Well, good for you for getting monetized.
But yeah, I mean, it's amazing that there are modalities out there that create so much potential for equity. I feel very aware all the time that there are people who can't afford to take a class from me. You know, they're expensive. And I feel excited that I'm offering such a reasonable, like $85 is really cheap for a class for me compared to my normal prices. And you know, I was able to do that by playing with the time, playing with the number of students in the class. But generally, you know, some people can afford my classes and some can't, same as a work of art. And some people can afford a 6-inch quilt, others can afford a 6-foot quilt. And it's not my job to make the 6-foot quilt affordable to everyone, but it does feel awesome that I can have something free like this on YouTube and also get paid by YouTube, and also be able to, you know, advertise the things that the 4 of us are doing. Hopefully you sell some books, hopefully, you know, that it's like, that to me is incredible, that everyone can get their needs met with things like YouTube and Instagram, where we can be generous and also get back what we need to do our work.
So on that note, I'll advertise my book again.
I'm so excited I'm so excited.
Edition, quiltfolk.com. You can pre-order. So
got my Quilt Folk subscription. I didn't take this one out of the plastic yet, but oh, that Quilt Folk magazine.
yeah, they do.
They're beautiful. I'm looking forward to the Wisconsin issue whenever that comes out, and I have my chance.
Okay, I am getting low battery warning now.
Roderick, thank you. What a pleasure. Those of you who were in for the long haul, 3 hours and 15 minutes, thank you for joining us. Awesome.
Yes,
Those
I
of you
thank
on
you
YouTube,
as well.
thank you for joining, for sewing with us. Please share on Instagram. We always reshare when people post about it. So good night. It looks like you've got somebody in the kitchen cooking for you. So
Zak made the video as well.
I love it.
Wait to softball.
Hey there.
It's so fun hearing you two completely enjoy each other.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah. We are in the sweet spot. Well, have a wonderful dinner. It's nice to see you. Thank you, Roderick.
Look forward to meeting you
so
in
wonderful.
person one of these days, Heidi.
Oh, we're gonna like hug before we even talk. Maybe one of those guttural sounds will emit. I see you at a distance.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.